17th, 2017. Can we have a roll call, please?
Good morning, Chair Liu.
Present.
Vice Chair Kim.
Here.
Board Member Firth. Board Member Balte.
Present.
Board Member Guyer is not here yet.
Thank you. Now is the time for oral communications. The public may speak to any item that's not on the agenda. I don't have any speaker cards for that. I do have lots of speaker cards for item number 4, which is the hotel on El Camino Real. And for everybody here who's in the audience, I just want to let you know we'll probably get to it in, it's probably, I would say, at least an hour and a half. And so that would be 10 o'clock. It could be as late as 10:30, depending on how the first 2 items go. So you're welcome to stay, or if you want to go out, you can come back as well. And then if you do want to go out, it is on the, what do you call it, the webcast. So you can also kind of follow it and see where we are in the meeting. Then you can know what the right time is to come. Okay, so
if I
yes.
may, Chair, just parking downstairs is usually 3 hours. But you can get the day passes from out front here.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any agenda changes today? No. And then we can move on to the first item, which is number 2, 3001 El Camino Real. Recommendation on the applicant's request for approval of a site and design review to allow for construction of a 4-story mixed-use development with 19,800 square feet of retail space, 30 residential units in the CS zone, as well as a 3-story multifamily residential building with 20 units in the RM30 zone. The project also includes a request for a preliminary parcel map for a lot merger to allow for the proposed development, a design enhancement exception, and a parking adjustment for shared parking. The environmental assessment is a draft mitigated negative declaration, was circulated for public review on July 3rd, 2017, and the circulation period ended on August 2nd. And the zone district is service commercial and RM30 multifamily residential and R1 single family residential. And our project planner is Claire. Welcome.
Good morning. Claire Hodgkins, project planner. The proposed project is located at 3001 El Camino Real. This is as you mentioned, 19,800 square foot commercial retail area and 50 residential units proposed. Includes 2 separate buildings. So the first building is located along El Camino Real. It's a mixed-use building, 4 stories. And then the building fronting Acacia is a multifamily residential development located within the RM30 zone. So the project site is currently 3 parcels that would be merged into one as part of a preliminary parcel map application. The site has split zoning, so it's a CS, RM30, and then a small portion of the site is zoned R1. So the site also includes split land use designations, service commercial, multifamily residential, and single family residential. It's currently developed with 2 buildings along El Camino that total 9,100 square feet of retail commercial surrounded by surface parking. And this just is a map that shows the complete project site area with applicable zoning and how it's split. So based on ARB comments, the applicant made changes in particular to add to the El Camino Real frontage to add better pedestrian amenities, to better define the corners and their transition to the entrances, the proposed materials, better definition to the base of the structure, and to add a residential entrance. Along Acacia, based on ARB comments, the applicant made changes to bring down the first floor to 4 feet, but previously it was 13 feet above grade. Decrease the overall, that in turn decreased the overall height of the structure. So there is a portion of it that goes up to 35 feet, but the majority of it goes up to about 25, 26 feet. They added pedestrian amenities, added vegetation, and provided balconies to better signal habitation. and made changes to the proposed materials. So key considerations for today, the project provides multifamily residential rental housing on a housing inventory site, which fulfills a need for the city. It also is close to office and transit, and this use is consistent with the comprehensive plan vision for this area. Parking, the proposed project is providing 4 fewer parking spaces than required by the code for the site, which requires a director's adjustment. Also, the loading space, they're asking for an exception to put that on the street instead of on site. Design enhancement exception is required to allow the garage ramp to encroach into the setback. The draft mitigated negative declaration was circulated on July 3rd. The circulation ended on August 2nd, but you can, of course, comment on that document. And we'll be preparing a final that would go to council. The project received preliminary feedback from the ARB at the end of last year, and changes to the design since that hearing are summarized in the staff report. So following your review, we would go to council. The PTC has already reviewed this and recommended approval. And staff is recommending that the ARB take the following actions. Consider the mitigated negative declaration and mitigation monitoring and reporting plan, and recommend approval of the site and design application, parking adjustment, and design enhancement exception to the City Council based on findings and subject to conditions of approval in the record of land use action. That's all.
Great, thank you very much. So we'll do the applicant presentation now, and you have 10 minutes.
How do I make this?
There's a drop down at the top,
Yeah.
the view or something.
I can't figure out.
While she's doing that, good morning. My name is Tim Steele, and I'm with the Sobrato organization, the applicant. First, I want to thank the Architectural Review Board for the opportunity to present our updated application for the mixed-use project at 3001 El Camino. That is in response to our first visit with the ARB in November of last year. Second, I'd like to also thank staff for their hard work and agree with their analysis and their findings and recommendations in the staff report. So, I'm pleased to present to you that we started this project with the design process with a directive of being compliant with the existing zoning designations. In this case, there are 3 different zoning designations on the subject property. Also important to the design approach is to consider the context and be sensitive to all the street neighbors and minimize traffic patterns there while predominantly focusing this to the acacia side of the project. As our architect presents to you this morning, I think you will appreciate that we have developed a careful, responsive, and thoughtful design project that has accomplished these goals and more. This mixed-use project provides 50 new, well-amenitized rental units, and in response to Council's expressed desires, they are smaller rental apartments with an average size of 750 square feet. Additionally, the Council has shown interest in preserving retail. In this case, we are required to replace 9,100 square feet of retail, but we can build as much as 20,000 feet of commercial. We are dedicating all 20,000 square feet to retail only. On a parking note, we are proposing the 2 complementary uses share a small portion of its guest parking, being the 4, or a total of 2% of the total project parking. This is supported by a parking analysis in your packet. Additionally, the CS parking is currently designed to provide traditional retail parking in keeping with the City of Palo Alto's parking requirements. However, we've also designed the CS garage to accommodate future parking lifts. This would be accommodated by adding the lifts in the current residential area, but shifting the security fence between the unsecured commercial and the residential to keep the allocation of residential parking exactly what it is today, while allowing to enhance and add additional parking to the commercial side, so we could use a higher intensity use in the space, such as a restaurant, and not have the project not have enough parking in anticipation of that potential use in the future. With that, I'd like to introduce our design team that's here today, which we're available to answer any individual questions you might have. I'll start with my architect, Rob Steinberg. He will be making a further presentation in a second. We have Nick Samuelson with the Gazzardo Partnership, our landscape architect. I have Nectorius Matthew from Kieran Wright, our civil. I have Gary Black from Hexagon, our traffic engineer, and my associate with Sobrato, Robert Tersini, all in the audience. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Rob Steinberg, and he'll be walking you through our changes on our project. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Rob Steinberg. I don't want to be difficult in the beginning, but I noticed that the screen is kind of cutting off part of the image. Is there any way to adjust that? None. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll work with what we've got.
If it makes you feel any better, on our screens it's much less cut off, if any at all. So
okay.
We're looking at the whole picture.
Okay, great. The last time we met, you asked us to go back and really focus on 3 areas that you would like us to further develop. The repetitive character along El Camino Real, the sense of access and clarity of entry into the El Camino building, and then how to make the RM30 building on Acacia a little bit more pedestrian in nature. So let's just start with quick refresh. 3 separate parcels merged to one. You know, as a designer, you think, well, that's going to give me greater flexibility. So that's very positive. But keep in mind that each of the 3 still has their specific zoning requirements. And then the aggregate merge site needs to respond to the El Camino Real design guidelines, the South El Camino Real plan, as well as the Cal Ventura area plan. So there's a lot of direction as to how this should work. There are 2 important characteristics of the site that I'd like you to kind of keep in mind. First of all, let's just get used to this pointer. People are going to be coming to the site from the corners. You can't get across El Camino directly across our site. So everybody's going to be coming either from the Olive side or the Acacia side. And then the second thing, as you can see in the drawing, is our site's a little unusual that it's got this bulge where there's a 2-foot level change in the site, which is not really common or desirable. The fact that it's low, it goes high, and it ends again low. So there's kind of 2 options for dealing with our garage there. One is we put it at the top of the crown, in which case a good portion of the garage is going to be exposed along the sidewalk and the street, which is obviously counter to making it pedestrian friendly. So what we've done is we've lowered the garage completely. And what happens is when people come from the corners, we now have the flattest area of the site, and that allows us to utilize that for public activity, for gathering, for socialization. So I'll just orient everybody. Olive, of course, is at the top, El Camino and Acacia at the bottom. So let's start looking at pedestrian access. The first thing I'd like you to note is that we've moved the buildings as far to address the street, as close to the street as possible, so that maximize the distance away from the homes. And if we look first on the El Camino building, our mixed-use building, we've tried to make that building both porous from the front, in the back, and the opportunity to spill out to the corners. So, for example, it's a little hard to see, but you can enter the retail here from the Olive side, from the corner, or you can get into the middle, all from the Olive entrance. And from the other corner on Acacia, you can get into the retail from the corner, from the middle, and then there's a second shared entrance that is both residential and commercial in the middle of the site. Both the corners have plazas, ideally that would be restaurants or activity that could spill out and activate both the El Camino corners. On our residential street, because we only have residences on Acacia building, we tried to develop a sense of arrival, both motor court and pedestrian, for the residential. You can see we've got two lobbies that sort of flank that and activate it. And then we've got the potential of a restaurant that could also spill out and activate that space. And then we have another entrance farthest away moving east. In respect to the parking, just very simply, on the left is the residential, and the residential only access the site from Acacia, 100%. On the right is the retail, and retail can come in and access about 15 to 20 cars here, but everyone else needs to exit and come from Acacia. So we've really limited the impact of vehicles along Olive. So we've talked about the planning. Let's focus a little bit now on the elevations. This was the original elevation we looked at last time on El Camino. And I think there was positive feedback on the transparency for the retail at the lower level. But there was concern about, there wasn't a strong sense of clarity and hierarchy of entrances to the building. There really was one major entrance on the corner. And the second thing was, there was a little bit of concern about the repetitive nature of the middle of the building. And when we went back and looked at it, I realized that not only are all three of the bays the same, but the spacing between the bays is also almost the same. And so it really makes a very static, repetitive pattern. So our goal here is to activate the street and to make it pedestrian friendly. To do that, we've prioritized the two corners, and we've made oversized entrances. Glass that comes on the corner and then goes vertically. And to the left of that, you can see we're flanking it with the yellow, with a warm wood material to give some accent, some residential character to that. And then we're doing that again, same strategy on Olive, a little bit smaller scale. It steps down, but the same idea of the vertical glass and the warm wood material flanking that to talk about entrance, the transparency we're retaining. And then, the question is, well, what do we do in the middle? Well, what we've tried to do is anchor the corners with two lobbies. One that allows you to get into the building here, and a shared entrance that allows you to get into the residential as well as retail. And we've taken that same idea along Olive, where the retail comes up and the glass comes up, and it's flanked by the wood. So that's a comparison of the two. This is a view from Acacia. You can see we've recessed the first floor so the diners could spill out. We're stepping the building down as you move away from El Camino. And you can see we're introducing these wood-type materials, warmer materials, that really begin to talk about sense of entry, and also pay homage to the redwood trees, across the street. We did a similar strategy on Olive, room for gathering on the corner. You could see the warm wood material really flanking, calling attention to the sense of entry, and we're emphasizing the corners with variety, both in plan and elevation. And then lastly, real quick, we'll look at the Acacia building. This was the original building. The basic concern was that the garage was too far out of the ground and exposed. So up at the top is a section that we just looked at, and you could see the garage was out of the ground about 11.5 feet. What we've been able to do now is to lower the entire building 7.5 feet. So our height comes down, the garage comes down, the building comes down. And by lowering the height, we were able to create a little finer grain scale to the bays. We're able to connect them to the ground. And then we punctuated it with two lobbies, one at the head and one in the middle. So that's a comparison of the two. I think there was very good advice from the ARB and from staff I think this is a really good improvement. On Acacia, there's the shared pedestrian motor court plaza. It's activated, hopefully by a restaurant, the 2 lobbies, people going back and forth with the amenities. And as we move farther away from El Camino, the building steps down to the 2-story. We're anchoring and grounding the building. We're creating a sense of entry, a place to sit. You know, if you were being picked up by Uber or Lyft, maybe you don't want to be in the main plaza if you're leaving with your suitcase. So we've got another entrance that's not just a back door, but it's a dignified way of coming and going from the building. So we're excited about the collaboration with you and staff, what we've shown you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. So now is the time for public comment on this particular item. Staff, I think there were some late cards. I don't know if it's for this item. Okay. Great. So we do have one speaker, which is Mr. Moss, and you will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Liu and Commissioners. Well, the development meets the zoning requirements, so there's no issues about compatibility, but anything that's developed on this site is going to create a problem because it's a block or two from the most congested intersection in Palo Alto, El Camino and Page Mill. And no matter what you put there, it's going to be a problem. I've gone down El Camino at 10 o'clock in the morning and traffic is backed up past Acacia. So there is going to have to be some attention paid to how people get in and out of that site. And putting the parking entrances on Acacia or Alto is probably the only way to do it. You can't get in and out along El Camino. They'll just be blocked forever. If there was a way to go from Acacia around past Fry's and go down Park and then get down to Page Mill and El Camino, that might actually work more effectively. So you might want to take a look at that, whether it's possible or not. As far as the design, I'm not sure what I saw was the last one, but some of the accents were vertical, and it made the building look bulkier and taller. And I think if you're going to put accents in, the accents should be either square or horizontal, so the building doesn't look as bulky and it has more of an extension rather than a height emphasis. So I think take a look again at the way that the building is laid out and the way the accents are put on. Maybe I missed it, but it looked to me like it was mostly vertical rather than horizontal. And I think we should take another look at that. And finally, we should have as much landscaping as possible along El Camino. And that's not just trees along the street, but also if you can have planter boxes in front of the building so that you have some greenery and you make the building look like it's more, let's say, environmental rather than just a structure. I think that would be an improvement also. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Moss. Okay, so are there any questions from the board?
Of whom?
Peter?
Yes, for the architect, please. I'd like to understand the raised floor of the back residential building. You said it's 4 feet above the grade, but I'm not sure which end of the building. It seems that the grade, Acacia Avenue, slopes towards the bay. And in the renderings, the people are maybe not the best way to judge it, but at the main residential entrance, sort of closest to El Camino, how high is the main floor plate of the residence above the ground? And then how about it back at the other end?
Okay, so that's a good question. I'm sorry I wasn't clear on that. If you look at the bottom section, the lobby closest to El Camino is right here, and that's at grade, flush. And then you can see this dotted line is the slope of the grade dropping down, and at the highest point, it's 4 feet.
I'm sorry, I'm missing this. Then the lobby, is the lobby at the same level as the residence?
The lobby, there's 2 lobbies, one on the left, do you see it here?
Yes, that lobby.
Is at grade, flush with grade.
But I guess I'm referring to the floor level of the residences themselves, not the lobby. How high is the residence above the grade there?
At the sidewalk.
At the highest point, it's 4 feet, and at the lowest point, it's probably 1.5 feet.
Thank you.
Winner?
Yeah, thank you. Could you take me through how a person either using a wheelchair or not able to climb steps accesses both the retail and the residential?
Sure. I lost control of the... Did I do something? Oh. Okay. So let's start with the retail. So retail is the whole lower floor here. Mm-hmm. So you can get in at grade from here, from Olive. You can get in at grade where we're stepping the building back from the corner. And you can get into the middle of the building about here, about 3/5 of the way, 2/5 of the way of the top of the building. So
And that's from the rear.
there are 3 entrances from the front for the top half of the building. And similarly on the bottom, you can access the building from Acacia, from the corner, and we've stepped it back so that you can get in to a second division, and we've actually added an entrance here so you can get in to the top of the lower portion.
So
Yes?
So essentially, I'd be able to access any retail space from the sidewalk?
Yes.
Thank you.
You would. And you would also, I'll just point out that you could also access them from the backside as well, where there's convenient short-term
That part I got.
parking.
And then on the residential?
On the residential, I neglected to say one very important thing. Not only did we try to generate the lobbies here to have a sense of entry, but this building has shared amenity space for both buildings. For example, it's got barbecue and outdoor dining, and this outdoor space has a spa that's available, of course, to both buildings. So we wanted the main lobbies to be close so that if I lived in this building and I wanted to go down in my swimsuit to go take a spa, I could kind of go through the back and I don't have to go out around. So to get into the residential, you would either come in this lobby or you would come in this lobby.
Thank you.
Peter?
I'm sorry to keep beating to death, but again, back to the grades and the elevation of the building.
Sure.
What's confusing me is when I look at what's called your olive elevation of the residential lower building in the back, and I'm trying to make sense of how far, again, the floor of the residences are above the ground, in this case above that outdoor back area, the open space. And you said it's 1.5 feet at the high end and 4 at the lower end. And I'm looking at your drawings, and the lower end is clearly above the height of a person. And on the upper end by the lobby, it looks like at least 4 feet. Is there a grade change across the site transversely as well, or am I missing something? Or hopefully these drawings are a bit inaccurate?
I've been so focused on the public side of it that I'm less aware of all of the details. I believe that the site does fall to the back, but I'm going to get some support here.
Great,
from our
yeah,
engineer.
it just would be nice to get that resolved. We're looking at elevation 2 on sheet A3.3 for anybody who's following this.
That is weird.
Oh, I see. In the back. So we're talking about Olive. He's asking about the front. This is no more than 4 feet.
Right.
He's asking,
Very short
this
view.
looks taller. Why?
On Olive.
On the back side.
Yeah.
He's asking about the section going perpendicular.
Oh, okay. Hello, I'm Nick Tarios with Karen Wright. So yes, the back side of the site does drop down from El Camino, and that's why you have a taller section.
By how much, can you say?
Off the top of my head, let's see here. Do you know where the separate sheets are? Okay, I'm just looking for the separate sheets.
Also, would add that in our landscaping plan along Acacia, that from the sidewalk up to the building, that we're sloping the soil up to reduce the sense of how the 4 feet is out of the ground. So from the front, it doesn't read like, so there's a sense of that being added to the delta when you're looking at the images. We wanted the back to be at grade so we could do the amenities on grade, but we have the slope on the front side to reduce the sense of the building being a little higher than the street level. We also pulled the building closer to the street than prior images that you had seen in November.
We'll get to all that. I just would like to get a number.
Okay.
At the back of the building, on the low end and the high end, how high is the floor level of the residences above the grade?
Who wants to know? Okay, so the grade is
Along Acacia, yeah, we're at
But
39.
He wants to be the back. He wants to know the grade here. Yes.
8.5 feet.
The ground level is 8.5 feet below the floor of the apartments?
The finished floor of the building is 8.5 feet. The ground level is 8 feet below the floor.
And it's 4 feet at the street. So it's a 4
No,
foot?
it varies. So when you start,
He's asking about the worst condition.
the worst
Where's 4
condition.
feet?
Okay, no,
That's on
it's
the
not.
section.
We have 39 here for the building.
It's pretty
We have
flat.
39 for the building.
That's why I'm asking these questions. Well, help me out.
So
Get
here
an
we
answer
are
on this one.
7.5.
Or 4. Well, that's the curb.
The curve, yes.
If you look at the section, it's 4.5.
Can you, why don't we
Is there a
move?
4-foot fall
I
there?
was gonna say, should we,
No.
we'll move on and then maybe go
Okay.
back. But can I ask you to do, can I ask you to do a little bit more homework? Because I would just say the existing grading plan,
Yes.
it's relatively flat. So if you have to do, if you're doing something else for the building to get it to work, I understand. But like there isn't that much of a change front to back. There seems like there's an existing landscape strip there back in the back that's higher, but let's.
The grade generally is flat, that
Yeah.
is correct,
Yeah.
yes. And the building is raised to compensate for that. That's why you have the stoops and the podiums
Yeah.
coming out the front.
So we'll get back to the grade, but I think we can move on to other questions as well. Let's not get stuck on one item. Wynn, did you have another question?
No, thank you.
Okay, you're late. Okay. I have a whole bunch of questions.
Okay, sure.
Lots of questions. So, is there a public art requirement for the project? And then how is that being handled?
Yes, there is a public art requirement. It's going to be paid in lieu. They're not proposing any public art on
Okay.
site.
And then I was looking for it in the conditions of approval. I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it wasn't there. I just didn't.
It was just noted as the in lieu fee would need to be paid as a condition before the building permit is issued.
Okay. Thank you. There is, for Mr. Steinberg, there's a car wash requirement in the conditions of approval, which is number 68. And I think there's a car wash space on the landscape plans, but it looks like it's just a space. So are you building a whole pavilion structure for the car wash?
The condition allows us to, since they're rental property, not to provide one and have a lock-off on the water source and prohibited in the lease agreements. And that will be the choice because of the various spaces that the residents would have to park and would have to do the oil separation. So we're going to elect not to have a wash station.
Okay. Thank you. Are there air conditioner condensers for each unit? And if so, where are they? Are they on the roof or are they on the balconies?
They're on the roof.
Great. Good answer. Are there Z ducts on the El Camino frontage for ventilation? I mean, I think you don't have to have it if you have air conditioning, but
We haven't quite got to that level of development.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
No, we don't have the MEP, but we would be looking at meeting code for fresh air makeup, which has changed recently, and either they be incorporated into the window systems themselves or designed in a way that they would complement the architectural exterior.
Let's see. And I think for Mr. Steinberg, you're showing a lot of soffits, like exterior corridors, the corners on El Camino. What are all of what's all the soffit material? Is it just stucco, or do you have different material, or will it vary depending on?
It's going to vary. So, like on Olive, you can see the inside is the soffit's going to be wood. On generally, it looks like it's wood, but it's going to be contiguous with the material that it's adjacent to.
You're trying to make it look three-dimensional. You're not
Absolutely.
trying to. You're
We're
not trying to make it
look
two-dimensional.
like wallpaper. We're trying to make it look three-dimensional. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. And then on the railings, I think in some of the renderings it's looking like glass. In some of your drawings, it's called out as a metal and sometimes a mesh.
Yes.
Are there? Yeah. So what?
It's a decorative metal mesh. So what we're trying to do is to strike a balance between not making it so clear that you see everything that somebody has up there, but not so opaque that you can't enjoy the view when you're sitting down inside.
Okay, that makes sense. On the building along Acacia, the RM30 zone building, you're showing balconies on I guess it's the first residential floor.
And some of the second ones. And
Yeah,
some
so
of the second
I guess I
ones.
was mostly concerned with the ones on the, I guess the ones that I noticed was on the, let's see. I guess my question is, you're showing some privacy screens between units, but not
Yes.
every unit. And on the back of the building, you're showing 3 staircases down to the open space. And I was wondering how that was going to work. Because it's somebody's private deck, right? They're private deck, but some of them are shared between units. So you don't necessarily have privacy between every unit.
So you are correct that we are missing some perpendicular separations on those balcony. One or two are shown, and there are a few that are missing. But for the stairs, for example, the 2 units on the left would share a stair.
Yeah.
The 2 units in the middle would share a stair, and the bigger unit on the right would get its own stair.
Yeah.
So, apologize about that.
Okay. I think we can discuss that later. And then okay, I think that's all the questions I have.
Okay.
Or I have one last question.
Sure.
I've been reading a lot of complaints about one of our new mixed-use buildings on El Camino, and the complaint is from retail customers cannot figure out how to get into the building garage and then get from the garage to the stores. And so I was wondering if you could explain, like if I'm coming to one of the stores in this future building, right? How, as a customer and not as a resident of the building, like how do I know to get to the front door of the store? And I think part of it is signage, which is in your part of the project today. But I think this is something that I'm curious about.
Just see if I have a better drawing to explain this. Okay. I was looking for the floor plan, but Pretty straightforward, really. If you were coming to the retail and you wanted to park in the garage, you could come on El Camino, turn on Acacia, come in our main entrance, and go down the ramp. And this part, the northern part, 2/3 of it, half, is the commercial parking. And there is an elevator lobby right in the middle of that building. So centered in the middle of the commercial dedicated parking is an elevator that takes you right up.
Can you differentiate it from the residential elevator lobby?
Yes, it's separate.
I know it's separate, but actually make it, like, it's not really part of the ARB's purview, but like design-wise, make it look more public. So like we have some of the garages here in downtown where the elevator enclosure, like the elevator lobby, is all glass. So it's pretty clear it's like a public lobby. But then like the residential elevator could be more solid walls.
Sure.
It would look like something private. And
Okay.
yeah.
I
and I
follow
understand
your
that you have a fence, a gate and everything too, but.
No, I follow your point. So that elevator lobby that is dedicated just to the retail is on the same plane as the glass retail. And so it's going to be of that same vocabulary. It's going to be quite clear that that is an elevator dedicated to this use. It'll speak the same language, and I take your point that it should be obvious and clear that that's an asset to the project. Yeah. Thank you.
And then also too, that maybe possibly have consideration for signage to the ramp, the garage ramp. So it's like if I was a customer and I came down Olive and I turned into the parking lot, right? And the parking lot's full,
then
I might not know to make a little U-turn through the roundabout and go down to the ramp.
So there should be some signage at the end that explains.
Because to be honest with you, Acacia doesn't have as good a visibility as Olive. It's that's just my take on it. I don't.
No, you're right. Here's one of the things, though, that we found, particularly on El Camino and with retail, that if you can get a clue of where the parking is before you see the retail, as compared to seeing the retail and then seeing, oh yeah, you could park here, it gives you a few minutes to process. But your point's well taken.
Agreed. Okay. Any other questions? When?
I'm sorry, this is a complicated site, and I like the proposal and all that, but take me through how, as a resident, when I come home at night, late, I'm going to feel secure about where I'm parking and how I get to my home.
Okay. So we have two different conditions. For the El Camino building, you would drive into Acacia. You'd come through a nice entry plaza. It would be glass and the lobbies would be lit up, and we have columns and lighting in the sense of an arrival. And then you would go past the turnaround and you would go directly down to the garage, straight ahead, no turns. You would go in the garage and you go past the commercial, and there would be a secondary security gate so that this end of the site is all residential. And in the middle of that residential parking would be an elevator that would take you directly up to your unit. On our Acacia building, you would make the turn on Acacia. You would go past the building. You would turn into the site and make a left and go right into double-loaded parking garage. And if you were at this end of the site, you could go on that elevator. If you were here, you could go up a secondary lobby directly to your
And that's
unit.
a secured garage?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
perfect.
yes.
Thanks. Nice answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Q?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Steinberg, for your presentation. I think overall the project has made a lot of improvements from the last time we've seen it. I especially appreciate the fact that you're trying to accommodate our wishes for that Acacia building to be lower and closer to the ground than it was before. I do agree with Board Member Balte that there's a little bit of open-endedness to exactly how far above grade that building is. I was looking at the building sections on sheet A 4.0, and it seems to actually fairly clearly call out that on the garage entry portion of the building, that the finished floor of the residences is 8.5 feet above ground, but I guess that's closer to the garage ramp, so perhaps it's a little bit higher than it is actually at the sidewalk of Acacia. But I do think it's definitely an improvement over the 13 feet above ground that it was.
Excuse me, I apologize for the confusion here. On sheet A 4.0,
Yes.
if you look to the section, closest to the bottom right corner, you can see that the grade, the existing grade level, I see what's causing. The section is taken not at the street, it's set back from the street.
Right.
But if you look at the notes, that the curb, is at 0, That's where the street is. And level 2 is 4 feet higher than that.
So the sidewalk of Acacia,
the section that we're looking at is showing the grades ramping down to the garage.
so Acacia is essentially parallel to the building. There's no additional slope along Acacia.
No, there is. If you,
Seems like it.
the street is sloping, but we are building up the grades with a series of planters and landscaping. Can you
So
see?
still to me, maybe I'm misreading the drawing, but you seem to call out that dotted line saying sidewalk grade change, and it comes down basically to the garage entry, which would indicate that it's still
Yes.
8.5 feet below the residential finished floor. So I mean, it's okay. It's just something to maybe take a look at and confirm with us. But
Sure. So I just want to point out one thing to you. So this is the construction, but if you look at the rendering on the screen, you can see that at the lower part, we're actually naturally berming the land up. Then we're doing another layering with a retaining, with a secondary planting, so that we're really trying to make the building feel grounded.
right, and I think you've done a much better job of this than it was previously. So thank you. I guess my comments are a little unorganized, but I'll just make them as I go. So I wanted to reiterate a point that was made previously, that I feel strongly that the long-term bicycle parking should be accessible at grade. I think given the location of the site, it's actually a great location because it's on a busy street, El Camino, where I feel that we can use the greater density, and it's also convenient access to the Caltrain station on California. And just being able to get around, I think, from this location is a great asset to the project. And I think for those that are taking their bicycles everywhere, to have to ride your bike down the ramp or to have to shove it into the elevator to go down to park your bike seems like a bit of an inconvenience. But I understand that it's not a requirement. But I did want to reiterate the point.
We'll take that to heart. Of course, we're fighting for all these different things, but I
understand
recognize what you're saying,
difficult,
and we'll try to accomplish. We'll try to address that.
Yeah, thank you. But I can't help but really applaud your take on the project, because it is such a difficult project with the 3 different zones and just the awkward shapes that you're trying to merge to make this project happen. One comment that I had looking through the drawing set was, I think the perspectives at eye level of the different views of the residential entries, the corners of the building are excellent, and they give us a nice feel of what the building is going to look like and how people are going to interact with it. Maybe a comment that I don't make too often is maybe we could I was looking for maybe a view of a bird's eye view that would show both of the buildings and how they relate to one another, as opposed to simply having to look at the elevations and make my own compare and contrast observations. But that's a relatively minor comment. The reason that I wanted to look at that was I think the material palette that you're using between the two buildings is quite similar, and there's a lot of repetition of materials. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think you can use that to your benefit in this project, especially because you've got those shared amenities that you were explaining in your presentation. The elevation along El Camino, I think, is much better, and the fact that you're kind of staggering these elements and you've moved the ins and outs of the building in such a way that I think begins to feel much more interesting and less repetitive. I like the fact that you've reoriented the residential lobbies to face one another and to really make that feel like a residential entry for pedestrians, bicycles, and automobiles alike from Acacia. I think looking at the elevation drawings, one thing that's a little misleading is, traditionally we use a lot of line weights to indicate what elements of the building are closer and what elements are further away. And I know that you're attempting to do that using some kind of an opacity layer in some aspects of the building, but I think it can read a little bit more flat than you're actually proposing. And so that's where I think the 3D views really helped me to understand exactly how far back certain elements of the building are pushed back and pushed forward, and where the soffits are coming out to extend and create overhangs. Overall, I think I can make the findings to recommend approval of the project. I think there are a couple things, such as a real materials board and material samples that we can look at, especially for the cement plaster and the colors and the materials, such as the metal mesh railing that you mentioned, as well as the wood, of course. But I think the fact that this is a very large project at a site that deserves a large project, and the fact that it's mostly residential is excellent, and it's something that the city really needs. And I understand that with the site and design review process that this project will go to council nevertheless as well. So I don't have very many hesitations in recommending approval, and I thank you for trying to address our comments and additionally listening to the other comments that I've made today and taking them to heart. So thank you very much, and hope to see the building built.
Okay, thank you.
Peter?
Okay, thank you. I am very impressed and pleased with the overall site planning of this project, the way you've accommodated the parking and the pedestrian activation of the corners. In fact, I'd like to say to staff, and hopefully this gets to the council level even, this is a good example of how to create pedestrian-friendly spaces on corners along El Camino. The way they've stepped back these plazas, they have a few trees and plants to shelter it a little bit. They're not expecting it to be the main public space for a residence, but for a cafe, a Starbucks. It really works. It's also attractive looking down both ends of the street. It's something we see repeatedly, especially in this neighborhood, is being developed intensely now, and we've repeatedly said that this pedestrian activation is important. This is, in my opinion, a good example of how you can accomplish that at the ground level. I also think that the parking is well done, that they have some spaces up at the grade level. When those people are looking for the store, there are 15 or so spots right there. Mm-hmm. So most of the time you can just run in and out. You also can sort of see where the store is before you go down the ramp, so you have a little bit of a visual sense of orientation. You have a mix of parking that for the residences, it's all the way in the back where they need it to be and understand it. We'll see in other projects even today. I think this is a good example, again, of how to mix it up a little bit with the parking to meet the needs of all of the tenants in the building. I find that planning really works quite well. Again, that circle in the middle again really helps define the space. It gives you a sense of slowing down, how to drive around. I applaud you on your site planning for this building, and I'm very impressed with the design at the grade level along El Camino especially. I'm also fine with the design enhancement exception for the ramp. We've repeatedly approved that kind of thing, and it's necessary to make this work. It's actually a good use of the land close to the residents and shields them. So again, I think that's a good idea. Okay, I have two sets of concerns, I guess. One is on the El Camino frontage, as handsome as I find the building to be, we have design guidelines that call for buildings to have a base, a middle, and a top. And I find this building has a wonderful base and a clear middle, but there's no top. And if I pull your attention to some of the renderings, maybe elevation 1 on 3.5, for example, if you look at that corner, that's a very dramatic sculptural bit of building there. It certainly marks the corner and it creates a wonderful pedestrian space, but I'm afraid I can't find that it meets the El Camino Real guidelines of having a top. We're trying to create a grand boulevard. It requires the buildings to have some sense of relating to each other over the time. Generally, that means some capping element of some kind or another. When I just sort of poke around on your elevations, say elevation 1 on sheet A3.1, what I'd call the middle, the large residential portion of the building again, has these white pieces which are nicely mixed up in massing, and as you pointed out at your initial presentation, they do create a less monolithic feeling to the street than their earlier plans. I put it to the fellow colleagues on the board, though, how far do we push to get some kind of a cap, some kind of a roof element on the top here? And I guess I feel that we have to enforce these guidelines. That's what they're for. And I don't see it on this facade here. So it would also be nice to see the actual materials you're proposing. I don't know why that's not here now, but it is pretty important what color that plaster is and what that wood finish would be. Then my second issue really had been with the building in the back when it was the residences were 13 feet above ground. It was just unacceptable. And I find the drawings unclear, but if the residential floor level is 4 feet above the grade at the street, I think that's great. 4 feet at one end and 2 feet or so at the other. That seems to me just the perfect amount of grade separation. I think from walking on the site, from looking at your grading and drainage plans and stuff, the back area should be similarly situated. I don't see how you can get it down 8 feet. And I suspect that there's just some inconsistencies on the drawings that I can't believe that ramp coming off of Acacia drops down 4 feet before you go into the garage. Doesn't seem realistic. You're showing it connecting to the existing parking lot. And I walked over there just yesterday and there's no noticeable grade change. And I think it's fine. I think I'd like to say, though, that we should ask that the building remain at about 4 feet above grade, which is what you've stated, and I think that's a really nice amount of grade separation. And I think it does have the effect that we wanted of bringing that building down to a more residential scale. I think the planting and the landscaping you've done along Acacia are quite handsome, and they do a nice job that the plantings do of giving it a residential feeling. I know I had mentioned earlier having balconies or stoops, but I think what you've proposed seems good. My concern was relating to the open space on the back. It's the kind of place where a mother may want her children to be able to play. And the difference between being 8 feet above ground and an average of 3 is a big difference. And that's where it's important, I think, for that space to be activated. The closer to grade you can get the residences, the better. So again, if it's 4 feet at the back and 2 feet at the front, I believe that works. Then when I look at the design of the buildings on the back, I'd like to pull up your rendering number 2 on sheet A3.6, and just comment to my fellow board members that I find that the design of those balconies, it seems to be some sort of a steel frame with an X-brace, is just, it's not quite residential enough, I don't think. It could use a little bit of revision just to downplay it a little bit more. So again, I'm eager to hear what my colleagues think, but that rendering shows it to me that it's just not quite right. So with that, I'll finish my comments and see what everybody else has to say. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr.
Would it
Steinberg.
be possible for me to respond
Yes,
to those
please.
while it's fresh in
Sure.
everybody's mind? Let's go backwards. X-bracing, we could certainly look at that. We could certainly look at the detail of how the mesh is attached and the framing. So we're more than happy to continue to refine that. On the acacia and the height of that building, I think I wasn't perfectly clear, and I just want to make sure that we're meeting in the mind. And where I think the confusion is if we look at A.40, there is about an 8-foot difference from the existing grade at the sidewalk to the first floor. But in the setback, as I showed you in the rendering, we are landscaping that to elevate it so that we minimize, so that it's about 4 feet from the grade against the building. Do you follow?
I follow. I find that you guys are being deceptive, frankly. These drawings are not showing it 8 feet, and they're not showing it 4 feet. The staff report and what's been stated in the public is it's 4 feet above the ground. Now you're saying it's 8 feet.
No, I'm saying it's 4 feet above what will be the finished grade.
Well, I'm talking ground, I mean the sidewalk. It's a flat site right now. Because you're building up the grade next to the building, it's deceptive to claim that that's the grade. We're all talking about the ground right now at the sidewalk. So the question I'll ask you once again, at the low end of acacia, if I'm standing on the sidewalk, how high above me is the floor level of the first floor of the residence?
8 feet.
Thank you. Okay, and I put to my board members that that's too high. It really needs to be 4 feet. That's what we asked for the first time around. Playing tricks with the finished grade is not really doing it. Your elevations and renderings are showing something different. Look at the rendering on the screen. That man standing there, his head is above the finished floor of that balcony. That's not 8 feet. It's important to present it honestly. And this is beautifully done, and you've got very good design stuff going on, but these are back and forth. I'm sorry, I don't want to argue back and forth. I'm speaking to my colleagues here that we need something that works, and I feel that this should be.
If you look on section A4.1, which is the cross section through the building along acacia. So like the one, so drawing number 1, that's actually at the exit stair, right? So they're showing the 4 feet plus an additional 20 inches. Right. So
which drawing are you looking at, Alex?
So the section on the bottom number
section,
1.
Number 1.
Right, and see the, like the exit stair?
Yes.
Okay, so we've got, what we've been mentioning is that there's the 4 foot difference between the first residential floor and the elevator lobby, right? And then there's an extra 20 inches down to the street. So that would be under 6 feet. So it doesn't, maybe it's 8 feet at, the far end near the garage, but it's not 8 feet all, there isn't an 8 foot change all the way through, right? So it's confusing.
Is the street sloping that significantly? There's 2 feet of slope over 20 or 30 feet.
There is a grading plan. There's a topographic survey on C1.0.
I understand that, but he wants to know the worst case.
Everything slopes slightly, right? I mean, this 31.5 versus 31.2.
Well,
If we think this needs to come back, I'm fine with that. But let's,
I would really.
I think we understand there's a problem, right? Okay, Wynn, you.
Thank you. I'm feeling a little better about being confused about some elements of the plan. First of all, it's a wonderful project to have come before us, to have this kind of development, and it's been in general a very good presentation. It's exciting to think of this number of residential units being built here. I think you've successfully, as I say, engaged the street. It's easy to imagine this as being a very successful place to live, to walk through, to walk by, to go to for retail uses. I think the parking is thoughtfully and effectively designed. I agree that having some surface parking for retail uses is basically essential in this city that still thinks it's a suburb. I very much appreciate the thoughtfulness that's gone into thinking about how people navigate through this site at various times of the day and for various purposes. I very strongly second my colleague Q Kim's comments about bicycle parking. I'm a person who rides a bike to get places like the dentist and the grocery store, and I do not want to go wandering off into the garage with my bicycle. I was a little puzzled by what seemed to be a continuous first floor balcony along Acacia. Is that a drawing error?
Yes, we're missing the perpendicular.
It's not actually an external
No,
walkway.
they're individual.
Because I would not support that.
Yes.
I also agree with my colleague Peter Balte's comments about the design of the second floor balconies looking a little over-designed. I mean, they look like the Alcoa building. This is not appropriate here, I think. I'm completely bewildered by what the grades are at Acacia, but I will tell you that from my point of view, grade means what I'm standing on the sidewalk, because that's what's going to affect my perception of how high the first floor is. And I thought it was 4 feet, and I thought that was terrific. I hope it turns out to be somewhere like that. You know, the drawings of this project get ever more beautiful, and I suspect that I'm not the most critical viewer of such drawings. I like your proposal for dealing with the plazas. I think that you address Mr. Moss's concern about having significant feel of landscape and greenery as you go along this project and as you move within it. When I look at the plant list, I forget which exhibit that is. I took some notes, but I know you can find it. I look at the plant selection. I guess it's L40? No, it must be L46. Anyway, you know where it is. If you look at the list and all the boxes checked no on whether these are native plants, then I don't have enough information about your landscaping plans to make the required findings about your landscaping being suitable habitat and using native plants where possible. This is a big site, so you should have significant non-human wildlife here, preferably of the desirable type. But at present, I can't understand the plant choices. I take one last look at my notes. I think that addresses everything I looked at. My notes from the first round say, great proposed use, like the corner treatments, still a little muddled on how it all fits together in terms of access, but you've addressed that. I'd say the way you handled the parking is not only good, it verges on visionary. I mean, this seems to be finally an appropriate use of puzzle parking or whatever we call it these days. This is really thoughtful. So many of the issues that we raise on other projects, you've thought about ahead of time. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Steinberg.
Well, I just wanted to say that we are certainly agreeable to relooking at the cross bracing. We're certainly will work with you on making sure we get a good balance with the drought tolerant plants. And we'll give a good try to see what we could do for the long-term bike. So those I just want to, we'll work with you on that, no problem. If the issues come down to a material board, whether to put some detail on the caps along El Camino, and clarifying and refining the corner of Acacia building. If those are the things that are troubling, I might ask that we be able to do that with a committee and expedite that. We're trying to stay on a schedule to get to the council if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have let's see, do I? I'm generally in agreement with my other board members. I do want to thank you for doing a great packet of drawings. It's very clear and generally and easy to read. And thank you, Claire. You did a great job in the staff report. Here are my concerns. One is, I think it's to Mr. Moss's point, which is, I don't think there's enough landscaping on the El Camino frontage. You're showing some planters at the corner, and then you're showing some really, really skinny planters in the middle portion of the building. I was scaling them, it might be like 12 inches deep. And the ones that I've seen where we've done it really, really skinny, like at Bloomingdale's, like they just barely work. I would argue that in the 12-foot effective sidewalk, right? So we have the sidewalk, but it looks like a public sidewalk, but it's on your private property. I would argue that you have room there to do something else. We call it like the furnishing zone of the sidewalk. You can make those deep. You can make them deeper and thicker and get more plants in there. And I would like to see a detail for that. I didn't find a detail for that. I do want to see a detail for railings and maybe soffits as well. And I think to your point, also awnings. You know, I've been torn in my mind about this. I was thinking that the details could come back to subcommittee. And then I'm also reminded that some of the board members weren't happy with one of your other projects. Just the way well, I mean, not the design of the project, but just the way it was handled. So like the Epiphany Hotel, where things came back to the subcommittee, but the subcommittee wasn't aware of all the changes that were happening. So I think we will have to debate it here on the board. On the awnings along El Camino, I do want to caution you that, like I've done that on a big mixed-use building, and when you have the grade sloping, sometimes at the high point of the grade, the awnings look too low, and you don't see it in elevation. It's only once the awnings once they're installed, then you realize that they're too low. You don't see it in elevation. Also, on the storefront windows along El Camino, I think I would like a detail at the sill. I was looking at your drawings, I couldn't figure out exactly what you're doing. But I think generally we like to have some sort of nice detail at the base there and not just have a standard storefront going down to like down to the concrete curb. So I don't know if that's tile or some sort of detail or an extra channel or something. I think that would be appreciated. I think I also would want to see more information on the, so in addition, I think the board members have mentioned the materials board, and then in addition I would include like on the landscape, like the decking. I think you're showing wood decking on Acacia. And I just want to caution you, like wood decks look great when they're new, but like a year later, they often look terrible if the stain is wearing out. And in the most high traffic areas, they get worn down pretty heavily. And so I want to know is it stained wood? Is it pressure treated wood? Is it Trex? What exactly is it? I agree with Board Member Firth on landscaping. I would not be able, I don't think I could make the findings for that. And it's not just drought tolerant anymore. Our findings changed earlier this year. So it's California or local native plants that can provide habitat to wildlife to the maximum extent possible, factoring in maintenance. And in your planting plan, I mean, there are a lot of very good garden plants, right? Like fortnight lily. I mean, that could be, I would say, just out of the top of my head, maybe that could be like a native iris, possibly. You're showing lavender. It seems to me that maybe could be an eriogonum or a zauschneria or possibly a salvia, showing like Raphiolepis and rosmarinus. Those could also be native plants. So it seems to me that there's like a whole bunch of them that could increase your ratio of non-native to native plants. Also, I had some trouble keying the plant palette to the drawings. I'm not sure, they may not be final yet. And so I think that could be revised to get them to get the plan and the plant legend perfectly corresponded. So that's all. Oh, and then I think my last item would be, I would argue for maybe one or two more colors on the stucco between the two buildings, like an accent color. Maybe at entrances or something. I think the dark gray the gray that you're showing, I think is compatible with the Equinox building. My hunch is that the white is going to provide a lot of glare in late afternoon, and I think that's undesirable. So I think I think the other caution I would have on the white, if you don't want to have a cornice, right, is that all the dirt comes down on the cornice and looks terrible. And we have that here on our, we have a studio housing project on Alma where the dirt is just oozing down the sides of the building, and it looks awful. Okay, so we'll bring it back to the board now. What do you guys do you want to see this again as a board, or do you think this can come back to the subcommittee, or it could even come back to staff?
I think I would be in favor of bringing it back to the board.
I'm in favor of subcommittee.
Peter?
No, I don't understand how this subcommittee could handle all these things. So I think it has to come back to the board.
Do we list of every, or do we have any internal disagreements about the things that we've been discussing?
Well, Board Member Balte asked us to comment on the notion of a base, middle, and top.
Yes.
To me, I can see a top. I don't think the top necessarily has to be a crown or an eyebrow or anything like that. I clearly see elements of the building that extend higher, and I think it's more of a contemporary treatment of a top. So that doesn't bother me too much, and I understand that other people can view that in different ways. But that would be my response to that. The architect also said that he would take a look at the long-term bicycle parking. I just wanted to be clear that that really should be incorporated into the buildings. I just don't want it to end up, on top of the garage ramp or anything, because it's a matter of safety and being able to, bring your bike into a secured area very close to your home. So just want to throw that out there as well.
The language, we read the language of the code yesterday for that. I mean, it does ask that they be at grade, or it could be in a garage, right? Yeah. But if it's in the garage, then it needs to be next to the stair and the elevator. Right. And I would argue that
currently
it's not. Well, there's residential and there's also commercial, but I would actually argue that they're not in the best place.
I fully support the notion of getting much better accessibility for the long-term and short-term bike parking, as Q has been pointing out. I want to caution and ask my colleagues, I think if the architect just puts a trim band at the top of these white units in El Camino, the building will be much worse off. And what I'm really doing is trying to point out to us that we've been tasked to enforce these guidelines, which require a top. I would really like to see the architect give a very creative effort to how do you make a contemporary building meet this guideline. And if it would really require you to go back and try to understand what the intent of the guideline is. The intent is to create a boulevard of buildings which create a sort of a height line like the Champs-Élysées in Paris. That's what the planners, that's what everybody is dreaming for. And we're just tasked to try to enforce it. But I'd be really sad if this comes back to subcommittee with a 12-inch trim band of different color at the top, that we stuck our foot in the wrong place and it made it a lot worse. So I think if we are to require that, it has to be something that's done very carefully. And I think we should, as a board, think hard about this is a fairly well-designed building as it is. It just doesn't quite meet this guideline. Do we really want to jump into that?
Okay, I was trying to pull up the pull it up on the actual wording on the in the guidelines. This is under building design, right? So it's section 4.
I suppose I'm in.
So it doesn't really say you have to have a cornice, right? It's saying that you have to have a parapet edge. So it's pretty vague. It has to have something, right? Okay.
Yeah, my understanding is that the idea is to give the building a cap, a roof that's connecting to the other buildings up and down the street.
I'm not sure it says that.
So yeah, but it is vague.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is avoid us just having the architect, for the sake of expediency, give us a trim band,
Right.
which makes it a lot worse.
Okay.
So, because it is a well-designed building, and I don't want to make it worse. I'm just pointing out that we have this other requirement. So I think we're speaking with one voice on that.
Yes. I agree with you. More is better on big buildings. Okay.
The other issue, Alex, I think we talked about a lot, is the height of the residential building above the ground and how we establish that. I think we're better off giving them a clear direction than leaving it vague. I had thrown out there that the floor plate of the floor should be no more than 4 feet above the ground level at the sidewalk, up adjacent to the building. Maybe that's too much, but I think we should give them some direction. It's really a matter of how the parking access works in the garage.
Right. I get that. That was my point. Is that they have to get the ramp to work down to the garage. So why don't we say we want? That's what we want, and then we'll see what we get.
We started this when they came to us when it was 13 feet above the ground. We asked them to bring it to 4. We were told it was 4. When we're looking at it, it's 8 feet. And I don't know how to put it to you more bluntly, but we asked for 4. I think that's perfect amount as far as design relative to the street goes. Maybe I'd say 6 feet would be acceptable to me, given that you have other constraints. But leaving it like it is not good enough, in my opinion. But I think we should, as a board, speak how we feel about that, so we don't go around in circles on this issue.
I'm in agreement with you. Question for staff. So they're in a hurry to get to the council, as everybody is, right? What is the calendar looking like? And was there an anticipated council date that staff was thinking about?
Yeah.
So I'll take that question. So it really needs to, it's a site design application. It's gone to the Planning Commission. It goes to the Architecture Review Board. You have up to 3 reviews. I believe this is your second formal hearing. Our schedule is based on when it gets past this process. So we do have some tentative dates scheduled, but it's contingent on what happens here.
Thank you for that. Okay, Peter. We're going to leave it to you. I think you've got a motion.
Well,
You just have to make it.
I move that we continue this project to a date uncertain, subject to the comments we've made. I'd like to stipulate in particular that the residential building be no more than 6 feet above the ground adjacent to the building at the sidewalk.
I would go ahead with like the all the like the.
Do you want me
cornice?
to list all those things?
Yeah, cornice, materials, all of that.
Okay, that the design of the building facing El Camino be reconsidered to have some sort of a cap or element at the top on some portions of the facade. That the long-term bicycle parking be placed at grade or otherwise easily and directly accessible. That the landscaping be revised to incorporate native and drought-tolerant plants. That we have a color and material board presented. Railings, that the balconies and associated railings and awnings for the residential building on Acacia be reconsidered, as well as did we have an issue with the railings on El Camino?
Well, they haven't really. There's no design detail presented. So why don't we just ask for?
So we'd like to see some of that design detail. I think we also asked for some of the detail on the storefront glazing.
I would say window details.
Window details in
Yes.
general. Okay, so window details be provided. That the planters along El Camino be reconsidered to be slightly wider. Is that right? Deeper. I think that covers everything. So that's my motion.
Any seconds?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. So that's 4-0 with Board Member Guyer absent. Great. Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. Great. And Mr. Steele? We're going to take a 2-minute break and then hear the next item, which is 4190 El Camino Real. Okay, so let's resume. We have item number 3, 4190 El Camino Real, request for preliminary architectural review of a proposed 5,340 square foot, 22 foot tall service building addition and a 14,380 square foot, 27 foot tall solar canopy over the existing parking lot at an auto dealership. And the environmental assessment is it's not a project. A formal application will be subject to CEQA, and the zone district is service commercial CS with the AD overlay. And again, we have Claire Hodgkins, our staff planner. Welcome.
Good morning again. Claire Hodgkins, project planner. The proposed project is located at 4190 El Camino Real. So as you mentioned, this is a preliminary architectural review for a new solar shade structure and service building addition to the existing McLaren Volvo dealership, which is located at the corner of Arrastradero and El Camino Real. Project will also require a certificate of compliance to merge 2 lots. And this corner parcel is adjacent to an auto dealership along El Camino Real and single-family residences along Arrastradero Road. And this just is a quick view of the zoning on the site and adjacent uses, and the single-family residences are just to the left of the site along Arrastradero. So site plan, this just shows which part is the new building addition. So not along either of the frontages. And this is the new solar array addition. I've tried to show where the shade structure would go and how it would be over the existing parking, and then the with the solar over it. This is just a quick view of the project from El Camino Real, showing the shade structure right here and the existing buildings. So today, key considerations would be the consistency with the context-based design criteria, South El Camino Real design guidelines, and performance criteria. All of these are going to be applicable to the proposed project. Just very quickly on parking, I won't get into that in too much detail, but it seems like there are a couple of issues that need to be resolved, although it does seem like there are a few different options of ways that they can resolve that parking and provide some more clarity on it. So no formal recommendation is requested at this time, but following this hearing, the applicant would choose to file a formal application for major architectural review if they choose to move forward with the project. And that's all.
Great, thank you. And do we have the applicant here? Okay, great. And you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Claire. My name is Christian Oakes with TWM Architects. Good morning. This project's a bit smaller than the previous one. The first image that I'd like to present to you is the street image. The existing site has 2 very high-quality showrooms. These are very high-quality cars. And we are not really going to change the image that you'll see of this site. The work that we're doing is all really pretty well hidden in the back. Behind these 2 showrooms, which were completely rebuilt in 2011, is an L-shaped service building, which is in very good condition and functions very well and is intended to stay. So the problem with this site really is the service yard in the back, and I'll show you a couple pictures following this one of the existing conditions back there. They're storing all the service cars. They're storing some equipment. Trash is kept back there. It's sort of a non-customer area. And Claire, if you could go to the next photo. Or who is, oh, do I have it? Okay. They're parking all the service vehicles back here. moving them around rotationally. There's some storage bins, shipping containers that are holding a lot of materials. Let's see, there's a electric transfer station to one side. There are some nice existing trees back there. And so the service building addition is not really a service building, it's really a storage facility for inclement weather to store some of these really nice cars and protect them and store parts. There is a small office back there as well. Those are also flanked with completely enclosing the back of the site with a 8-foot CMU retaining wall, which will offer privacy to the neighbors. There's also a 10-foot setback at the rear. So that's sort of the first issue we're dealing with this. The second issue, and then the additions will match the existing that's out there essentially. The second addition is the facility is very poor on energy, and a consultant has been brought in to evaluate the entire facility. They're called Candle 3. They're a nationwide energy company, and we've been working together to figure out how to virtually eliminate the power demands of this high energy using facility. They've gone through the facility and replaced virtually all the lighting with LED lights. And the second phase of this is the solar and the analysis of this solar to offset these costs and work with Palo Alto's program called Palo Alto Green, which is supported here heavily, has come up with a pretty large solar array. In solving the problem of supporting the array, some structures were studied that introduced a lot of columns into this back area. And the solution that you're seeing today is to create one large canopy. Tried to get the canopy to cover the entire area without introducing any columns, but you'll see there are 2 columns that do drop into the area. It's really important with the heavy movement of these cars to minimize the amount of columns. We've come up with a really nice solution with a space frame. It is open air. It needs a little tilt to the south, which you'll see. We believe in studying this on a 3D model that it will be fairly invisible from El Camino or Arrastadero. I do have a sample of the material here, if you'd like to see that. Regarding the impacts, this really doesn't change the use. It really helps. It really doesn't change the parking of the site. It doesn't add any real parking need. The entire site really is a huge parking lot. We're fencing the back, which will help the neighbors. The enclosing some of the functions will help acoustically and screen some of these functions. There's only really one residence that looks into this area. The glass on the PV panels has an anti-reflective coating, so there's no issue with that. With me today, I have Zhao Liu, who represents Candle 3. If you have any technical questions in understanding Palo Alto Clean a little bit better, she's looked into that pretty extensively in putting this together, and the mathematics behind making this very efficient and working with the city's program to generate power for the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you. If there are any members of the public that would like to speak to this item, now would be the time. Otherwise, we can go to board member questions. Peter?
A question for staff, please. The portion of the site that adjoins the residential uses at the back, is there a daylight plane or setback planes required?
Yes, there is a daylight plane required. It's based on the adjacent residential use, so it's going to be consistent with the R1 zoning district standards, which I believe start at 10 feet and then 45 degree. And they haven't provided that, and I noted that in the staff report that that wasn't provided as part of these plans, and we would need to see that as part of the formal application that it meets that. It appears to probably meet that, but it's unclear at this time.
And how about the individual review guidelines, things like that for privacy issues? If we felt we wanted to get some landscaping back there, is there some requirement for that?
Yes, not under the individual review guidelines, but under, I believe under the context-based design criteria and possibly also the performance criteria, there is a 10-foot requirement, so we can push for that 10-foot requirement on landscaping adjacent to those that R1 district.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple questions for the applicant. Yeah, you can come up to the mic. My first question is, why are you doing this? Like, there are other ways to provide shading or weather protection. Why are you proposing this solar shade structure?
Because there's not enough roof area to put the quantity of panels that we need.
So you're looking to provide these panels for what? Just to generate energy for the building, for the charging of hybrid model McLarens?
It's for to offset all the energy costs for this particular site and generate some costs.
So mainly for building usage, for building energy usage, you're trying to recuperate that using these solar panels?
Yes.
Okay, understood.
This facility uses quite a bit of energy comparative to other businesses.
All right. And then I noticed that with the proposed shade structure that you're going to have to install several of these columns for the space frame in front of the existing service space.
Right.
And it looks like it's going to have to penetrate through the roof of the existing service space. Is there any, how do you propose constructing that? How does that work? Is there a problem with that? Has that been studied?
The penetrations all occur in the cantilevered front canopy. So it is basically a wood frame, plywood sheathed roof. So it'd be simple as a roof jack.
Okay. And then could you speak to perhaps, I don't know if there was a separate applicant, but I believe there was another project that was proposed that never fully was built out. Do you know anything about that?
In 2013, essentially the same service addition, a tiny bit smaller, was, I don't know the exact history. I understood it was approved. We couldn't find any records at planning on it, so I'm not sure. That's what I'm not sure of. It went all the way through permitting, and then when the energy issue took life, the owner decided to let that go, which we probably should have extended and then added the solar on, because it's the same basic building that would have been built.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's a little more carefully designed at this point.
Peter?
Is your firm designing the space frame solar panel support, or is that done by the energy subcontracting company?
The energy company oversees that construction, but that's a design build by a specific manufacturer. Is
it a custom design just for this site, or is this a space frame assembly that somebody picks out of a catalog or something? No.
Well, it's a proprietary system that is custom engineered and designed for this site, but it is a system that has been used similarly.
Okay, thank you.
And if you continue to the end of this, here's a couple other, let's see if I can get this. A couple other systems that have been built by the same company. This is in Southern California, and this is in a schoolyard pavilion.
I have a question for you. We've had some other photovoltaic projects in Palo Alto where the architects and developers were trying to use the translucent photovoltaic panels.
Very expensive.
Expensive, and then one of the companies went out of business, but there may be another one. But I was wondering, have you considered that?
It doesn't balance the cost. We're trying to save energy costs here, and
right.
That system is just doesn't work into the math.
But then you do have to add. You're going to add lighting.
Right.
Below it.
There will be,
even during the daytime.
There will be LED lights installed.
All that's running in right. Daytime. So
run by the solar.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Board member comments? Anybody? Q?
So thank you for answering our questions. I guess I was just trying to figure out, what the driving force behind this project was, and it's kind of, well, it's very different from the majority of the projects that we review. I think my primary concerns have somewhat already been brought forth, such as studying the daylight plane, any kind of landscape barrier between the single-family residence and the site along Rastradero. I guess my primary concerns are that this structure is very massive. From the pictures that you've showed us of the sample or the existing examples of similar space frames, it just looks very large. And I don't know if that's a result of the space frames in those example pictures being much closer to the ground than what is proposed. But I noticed you have some sections and elevations here, but you don't have a clear dimension on the actual height of the space frame. I kind of deduced that it was about 4 feet high. Is that relatively correct?
It's 5 feet.
5 feet? Okay. And so, although in your presentation you said that from El Camino and Arrastradero that you would hardly be able to see it, I am not convinced of that yet, especially when it hangs over the existing roofs of the existing L building. So perhaps when this comes back as a formal application, if you could provide either an animation or additional 3D views from El Camino and from across the street, from the single-family residence, perhaps, that can show us clearly that this isn't as obtrusive as it might seem to me right now. And then, of course, along with the daylight plane issues, I just encourage you to take a look at all of the criteria that is being used for us to evaluate your project, and to make sure that you're addressing those items as well. As far as the electrical equipment for the charging of what's being charged with the solar panels, where does that equipment go?
Jai might best answer that question, but it's fed back through the meter into the city.
Directly? There's no other transformer equipment or?
Good morning. My name is Jai. I work for Candle 3, the consulting construction company for the systems. First of all, I want to address Kim's question why we're doing this. First of all, we evaluated the utility bills of this customer, McLaren, Volvo, Palo Alto. We noticed that the utility bill is quite high compared to all the other commercial facilities. So the first reason why we're doing this is to reduce the utility consumption for this commercial facility to make it more energy efficient. We do LED retrofit for the high-end showrooms. We put solar on top of it to solve the generation problems. By doing LED, we reduce the base load of their utility consumption. Then the second step is to do the solar to provide renewable energy generation to, first of all, address the rest of the base load for this facility, and also Secondly, this is a more important reason because Palo Alto is called CPAU, City of Palo Alto Utility. They have a very strong incentive program to encourage commercial facilities in the city to generate renewable energy and in the meantime feed it back to the grid. There's an incentive program in place. It's called Palo Alto Clean. So Palo Alto City has 3 megawatt capacity to allow this solar program have incentive, which is 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I believe, for the first year with a 20 or 25 years contract. Then after that, once we meet that 3 megawatt cap, going to be reduced to 8.9 cents per kilowatt hour for the 20 years contract and 9.1 cents per kilowatt hour for a 25 years contract. So we're really trying to, be participating in that program and support the local incentive programs for the renewable energy for that purpose.
Okay, so where does the inverter go?
Inverter, you mean the solar inverter, so connections of the solar system will be going through a interconnection agreement with the City of Palo Alto Utility Company. So there will be an inverter between the solar panels and the interconnection. From our sidewalk of that building is a 208 system, so the solar inverter will be next to the electrical panel, which doing the interconnection for the system.
Okay, so I just don't see any notation of that on the plans as far as where is the electrical meter, where does the inverter go, does it need to be set on a platform, things of that nature are additional questions and information that we would need. I had some other comments or questions as far as coverage and FAR, but I think those have been addressed with some further research. I guess my only other comment is, does there need to be some kind of a wind study or weather study with regards to this, in the fall or winter, if there's a storm of some sort, are you actually going to create more of a howling wind underneath the panels? But those are things that can be answered perhaps after the other board member comments. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Wynn?
Thank you. This is a project that I'm glad to see. I have worked on sites in the city working on these carport solar installations. They're not easy to do. And it would be good to see one that works. The first thing I noticed when looking at the plans is it says on sheet A1.1, no new landscaping proposed, which I think is going to be in the way of me being able to make all the necessary findings here. I did tour the site, and certainly this area now looks sort of like a military encampment with storage containers and tents and people scurrying about, and I think it will be much better to have it enclosed, and I think that the local electrical generation makes sense too, but it does back up on what appears to be an entirely vacant R1 lot. Is that right? Was that cleared recently?
Say that one more time.
The residential lot off the court, is that a recently taken down building, or is that never occupied?
I don't believe
a lot
so.
split? What?
It's been vacant.
It's a traditionally vacant R1 lot?
Right.
But we need to handle it as an R1 lot, and it does seem to me, it's interesting because this is right next to a city electrical substation, which does provide landscaping between it and the R1 properties adjacent to it, and that would be a model, a starting place for what I think we would need to have here. It would be very helpful, probably essential, to have a good idea of what this installation would look like for people driving or walking by on the public right-of-way, and very much from the adjacent lot. I think it would be important not only to have landscaping installed behind the new building and structure and power plant, but to take a look at the compliance of the existing other landscaping on this site with current rules. I don't know what staff's view is on that, but this is not a large site, and I think this should be an opportunity to to improve that significantly. There's some good plants there, but they're sort of whacked into a state where they're not going to provide any kind of either human sense of landscaping, or certainly neither bees nor birds are going to find those attractive in their present state. They've kind of been neglected. And I'm curious to know what landscaping was originally planned for this site, and does this conform to that? I think the concept's good. We'll need to see more information to know if this one works. I hope it does.
Peter.
Thank you. I agree with the colleague comments we've heard so far. In analyzing this project, I first had a series of questions about the zoning, which we've touched on already, but then walking around from El Camino, I believe the solar shade structure is going to be visible from the sidewalk and the street and the corner traffic driving by. I don't think that's a problem necessarily. It's not a large structure, but it does beg for a little more detail as our questions were probing at as to how that's built and how it appears from the edge. And then I think also, certainly on the Charleston Road frontage, the landscaping could be improved there, and it would improve how the whole building appears. As I've driven by that so many times, and it seems to be a storing, unloading area. There's always a bunch of cars wrapped in white plastic there. It's not terribly attractive. And this project changes how that looks. Additional landscaping or changes to the landscaping along Charleston would help it even more. And given that the function there is fairly utilitarian, a little more shielding is probably the answer. I was most surprised, however, when I ventured in the back, and I'd never been back there before, how close this is to big power station, to the Tesla dealer, and also to the residences back there. And it struck me that you really have to do something to provide screening from your project to the neighboring lot, even though there's no house there now. I would suggest that takes the form of some serious landscaping, some kind of a hedge or plantings there. But also you'd really have to meet the daylight plane requirements as any other structure would. And then I question whether even the piece of the building, the corner facing the Tesla dealer next to you, there's a few residences on that cul-de-sac. Are they looking over that corner at this structure? And if so, you might want to consider that, wrapping the landscaping a little bit somehow, just to see how it looks. What I can suggest is go back there yourselves on this little cul-de-sac, and it's really a neat little community of houses. And just imagine how this 22, 24-foot tall structure will look to them, and see if you can do something to mitigate it, to make it fit in. I mean, it's just not fair to the neighbors to have some very industrial thing that's so visible from their front porches and their curb and cul-de-sac. And it seems to me it's not that complicated or difficult to screen it, but I'll certainly be looking for that level of screening from the back, from the residences. Ideally, they just shouldn't see this, or they shouldn't notice it being there. Then I had some thoughts about your solar structure, and this has come up on several projects recently where people are trying to get these solar panels on the roofs or covering parking, which is a great thing to do. We all want to support it. But it always seems to be that it's some solar consultant who just throws together the support structure without giving it much design thought. And several times recently, we've really had problems with that. On this one, it's an attractive idea, but I wonder if you couldn't just think through the design of the structure a little bit more as a freestanding piece, and then say you're going to put the panels on top of it. The thought that goes through my mind is if you could somehow get the edge of it, especially the edge facing Charleston and El Camino, to be level, flat, and maybe you could accomplish that by sloping it back inward to some point. What happens when you make it the way you've got it designed with a slight slope, it just looks all the more utilitarian and industrial. And I think this sort of structure, if you sloped it two directions inward to a center point or two supporting posts, could be a very attractive design, which is what your customers certainly expect when they're coming to buy a McLaren, that it's not just some canopy out of a catalog, which is sort of what I sense looking at this, but rather give some architectural effort to getting an edge to this, which is the visible part from the street, and then when a customer does peek inside it, make it look cool, which maybe if you slope them into two columns or something, could be neat. But somehow I think a little more design work and thought as to how the canopy structure is built would be effective. Again, I have no issues that it overall is compatible, and I think the design is fine, but some more detail. Thank you.
Okay, so I would just say I generally support like the overall concept of the project, in that here in California, our goal is to have each building generate as much power as it uses. That's the plan that's being incorporated into our building codes, and we're moving towards it slowly, right? But I forgot exactly where we're going. Is it 40% by 2020? 100% by 2050. Yeah, I forgot because Jerry Brown modified but we're generally trying to have all buildings generate as much power as they consume. So to that end, I do support the project. I was on the board when the previous project went through, and just for the other board members, it was just one bar. It wasn't the L shape. And they were proposing a solid fence and like a hedge, like a pittosporum hedge or something like that, and an employee break room or break patio in the back corner. So there was an effort to make the back nicer and to make a transition to the cul-de-sac. So, and I think that I would expect all of those things that were previously proposed in this particular project too. My general take on it is like, if there's a way to make it smaller or lower, would be better. It seems I don't have a great idea for that, other than I think what Peter is suggesting. If it's sort of more inset into the project, It seems to me that they would have if the footprint were smaller, then you would have columns in the parking lot, right? Anyway, if there's a way of making it, if there's any way of making it like 4 feet lower, I would support that, because it's really tall at the moment. And then my next question would be, is if you're doing all that with the space frame, are you creating like a place for like pigeons? Like usually, when I go into the city and like underpasses and whatnot, it's usually just all filled with like pigeon poo, and it seems to me that would not be desirable. And if you think that is a problem, then how would you mitigate it? Like usually, people end up covering everything with nets. So I would want to see that. And then I think as well, since you're going to have to light this, then I think we'd want to see the lighting for underneath the photovoltaics. So that's all that I have. I don't think that I'm not sure to me that there's a standard that says that like the space frame can't be visible. I think our standard is that it fits in with the context and the existing buildings on the site and the neighboring buildings. At the moment, I think it's kind of a stretch, but I think that you could get there. And I guess my question would be, is there a way to treat the edge of the space frame? Or is it better to leave it exposed? And that's just an open question in my mind. So I think that's all we have today. Any other closing comments?
I wonder if I could point out to my colleagues, if you look at the front of the package, the second image there, Arrastradero Road view from the south, it could use some more landscaping. And I wonder if we can collectively give them that input.
I asked for that last time around, and I didn't get it. I looked at it again recently, and I still think that there should be landscaping along the sidewalk. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you.
So at least 3 of us have made that point.
Okay. And then also, we do have the Arrastradero road project, the median project. So the city is going to be doing stuff in that vicinity as well. Some improvements there.
Well, I feel that because the shade structure will be visible from Arrastradero, the landscaping is integrally part of this project.
Yep. Yep. And they're going up, so I think it warrants more screening. Okay. Thank you. We will look forward to seeing this come as a formal application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it is 10:50. We have one more item. I know you have a time, you're okay? Okay, so why don't we, we'll take a 2-minute break so that the next presentation can get set up. Okay, I think we're ready for the last item today. 4256 El Camino Real, request for preliminary architectural review for a new 51,581 square foot, 5-story hotel, including 69 guest rooms and 8 townhouse units, with 85 underground parking spaces in parking lifts. The environmental assessment is not a project. The formal application will be subject to CEQA, and the zone district is service commercial. And we have Samuel Gutierrez. Welcome. Your first staff presentation to the ARB. Welcome. We'll try to be nice. And then we'll do the staff report, applicant presentation. We have 8 to 10 public speakers, and then we'll bring it back to the board. And it's a preliminary, it's just a study session, so no action is going to be taken today. There's no recommendation will be made by the board.
Okay, thank you. And good morning, board. As said, my name is Samuel Gutierrez. I'm associate planner here for the city of Palo Alto. And we have a preliminary application for a proposed new hotel in El Camino at 4256 with 8 residential units. There is a photo there of it, the street view. Moving on. The proposed multifamily hotel, and I do apologize, it's slightly cut off there, the text. We had some issues with the monitor, but it will be 51,000 square feet approximately with 8 units. The FAR will be 2 to 1. It is proposing 85 parking spaces. Those are in mechanical lifts. The project will range from 50 feet high at El Camino, and towards the back of the parcel it will drop down to 34 feet 9 inches. So it does taper down as we go further back in the lot. The parking, as I mentioned, is mostly in a mechanical lift system, and we do have new regulations that were inputted this year for parking lifts. We do have some concerns over the parking lift configuration currently, as they're proposed in 2-level tandem setups, and there are also 3-level tandem parking, meaning you will drive through one of the puzzle lift systems to get to another puzzle lift system. So staff did have concerns over that, and that's mentioned in the staff report. Although most of the parking lifts will be valet for the hotel portion, the residential portion is currently not proposed as that to have that service, and they will need to drive through one lift system to get to the other. And one BMR is required per the new ordinance that was adopted this year off of the 8. So moving on, we have these examples of the existing conditions on the site. There's currently a restaurant that occupies the site. It's rather small. It's only about 3,000 square feet. It's a mostly parking lot, surface level. And I did wanted to highlight the location of the existing restaurant relative to the location of the entrance for the adjacent residential complex. You can see here on the slide to the on the right photo, I point out that there is an entrance a little obscured by some street trees there, but that's where you would enter the large Palo Alto Redwoods residential complex. And to the left of that is an overview of the site in question. As there's a lot of speakers here for that complex, I wanted to highlight that. A few things that we would like the board to comment on are the following. We want to get some feedback on the parking lot layout. It's all subterranean with the lift system. The porte cochere driveway that would be the queuing space for people who would stay at the proposed hotel, and the valets would actually take your car and then drive it down to the subterranean parking lot right there, right in front of El Camino. So we do want to get your feedback on what you feel would be appropriate. The other thing we'd want to get your feedback on is the layout of the site and the design of the site relative to the protected redwoods that are on site and adjacent. There's a number of large redwoods on the site and even greater amount of redwoods on the adjacent Palo Alto Redwoods residential complex. So your feedback on that would be great. Also your feedback on the potential shadows that would be cast on the residential open space on the adjacent complex would be great to know. And the proposed overall design and its compatibility with the area and its open space that they're suggesting, along with the conformance with the El Camino design guidelines. And that's really it. Would you have any questions?
No, that concludes your presentation.
Yep, that concludes the presentation.
Great, well done. So let's do the applicant presentation now, and you'll have 10 minutes.
Hello, my name is Mircea Vascaris, and I'm the project applicant and also a Palo Alto resident. I'm just going to take a minute or two, just kind of introduce the project, and then I'll pass to my architect to work on the technicalities. So first of all, thank you so much for giving us opportunity today to present this project. I would like to thank also Sam. He's been tremendous of helping us to process all the information and everything we had to do to date in a very, very efficient way. I would like to point out in a minute or less here that I've been engaging with the Palo Alto Redwoods residents, which are also here, and I will be here if I was living in those units. Engaging them up front, I think it's very important to me, and that's what we did. We already had 3 meetings, and I would like to emphasize a couple of things that we did for the residents up front, which I incorporate in the current design. One of the major things that we had to adjust was on the townhomes layout, because it literally impacting their privacy, and we were very receptive to that. We also been able to eliminate the pool that was proposed for the hotel because of the noise concerns, so we removed that. We also start looking and blending the colors of the exterior of the buildings to kind of match more of what the Palo Alto Redwoods looks like. So those are just a few things that we've been very receptive to work with them. At the same time, I just want to bring up that our goal is to ensure that the building at this project development meets all the zoning regulations. We are not expecting and asking the city for anything that we are not allowed. We want to make it easier for everybody and as efficient as possible and work with our neighbors. Thank you.
Good morning. Chek Tang from Studio T Square, principal of Studio T Square. First off, I just want to thank the board for allowing us to come before you early in the design process. We really appreciate that. And I appreciate also Sam's guidance in the process, as well as all the different agencies that we met with, in addition to neighbors that we met with. So we really appreciate everyone's insights. Although the project is at a preliminary stage, one thing that I want to highlight is we've been trying to be really thoughtful about the analysis of the site, not just the architecture, but the siting, the existing landscape, the trees, the siting, and how we meet the existing conditions. So one thing that I really want to point to is the existing conditions, because it's really important to the site planning and the zoning of the building. So if you can see, the majority of the building of the Palo Alto Redwoods, fortunately we have a kind of a V-shape kind of on the rear of the property with a lot of beautiful redwood trees in place. However, the entrance of the Palo Alto Redwoods really is adjacent to our site, so that's something that we need to kind of deal with in terms of circulation. If you look on the screen on the number 3, I'll just highlight number 3. This is a view of kind of I guess this northwest corner of the site, where up against the condominium project next door, there's actually a couple of redwood trees on our site. But if you can see, actually the side wall of the condominium is very close to the property lines, actually 3.5 stories tall. The majority of the balconies are actually fronting onto the pool deck area. And if you look further back, pull back a little bit, there's actually quite a bit. This is actually looking at kind of the rear lot line of the site where the building, the V starts to pull away from a property line. But this corner of the building on kind of the south corner of the building is actually quite close to the property line as it exists right now. And then on the southerly property line, we actually have a two-story block wall that really becomes our adjacency. And then also along the pool deck and the recreational area of the adjacent property is essentially on the property line. So we're dealing with essentially zero lot line on two sides of our property. First off, I think the one thing that we were very conscientious of when we looked at the site is we have 4 redwood trees on site that we definitely, in addition to the existing redwood trees along the adjacent property line, that we absolutely want to preserve. So the 4 trees are here on this corner as well as here. And then the other consideration is also a series of redwood trees on at the front entry gate of the Palo Alto redwoods that we are also working with our neighbors to preserve these redwood trees here as well. The site plan, I think, is a really kind of an interesting notion of coming from our point of view, is almost like going from the urban edge on ECR, kind of migrating to a much more almost pastoral type of environment to the back. And we have tried very much to kind of look at the existing curb cut condition, because there's a curb cut right here going into the restaurant that's fairly close to the existing driveway of the condo project next door. What we've elected to do is create a street edge, kind of the boulevard edge was mentioned, but really pulling that driveway into the hotel, the porte cochere of the hotel, further away so that we can create some separations here between that driveway and on our proposed driveway. The idea of the whole concept is the notion that a client is really actually very artful. She actually has talked about public arts even before we started the project. So the idea is maybe creating porte cochere here with some of the public functions that flows out to the kind of the street edge. We do have kind of a larger sidewalk here, but having functions that really activates that street, having a porte cochere with some public arts that actually could be apparent from the street edge coming out to the front here. But the whole project is really organized by kind of this sculptural courtyard that is facing out to the redwood. So the idea is that as you come through the lobby, there's a really transparent connection to the redwood, visual connection to the redwoods. And as Mercier had mentioned, that we previously had a pool conditions here. What we have done is, because of the comments from the neighbors, we have relocated all the activity spaces closer to our lounge area here. The lobby lounge area is actually a double height volume space. The guest rooms are over here and on top of this bar here, and the 8 condominium units are positioned here. However, the access to the units are actually coming through the hotel lobby and coming through the courtyard into those townhomes, not necessarily from the back. The other thing that I want to highlight very importantly is the reason why we did the parking lift system is so that we don't have to build out 100% coverage on the site in terms of the parking garage. As you can tell from the garage plan basically follows this footprint right here, so that allowing us essentially natural landscaping along the side yard, as well as a substantial amount of space on the rear yard for natural landscaping. And I think it's really important because we are adjacent to essentially a zero lot line condition. And we actually learned some lessons from the Hilton Garden Inn next door, where they are forced into this service drive and there's mostly parking underneath. And then the adjacency with the neighbor becomes really kind of barren back there. This is really, I mean, the way we looked at this site is these are all front doors, because we do have neighbors who's looking into this area. So we really treated this rear property line quite generously in terms of landscape. So before we get into the architecture, the massing, we're also very sensitive to the neighbor. We have the 5-story, which is basically mostly on the El Camino Real edge and also along the commercial office building next door. The condos is actually 3 stories. As a matter of fact, it's actually lower than 34 feet. The condos are maximum 30 feet. So we're complying with that height limit here with a shed roof. And the shed roof we've changed based on the community's comment to kind of lower on the south, on the north side of the property, so that create less shadow on the neighboring property. In addition to that, we know that there's a tight spot right here with the adjacent property, even though it's quite close there, the building's quite close to the property line, but we've made a real kind of concerted effort to kind of create a massing step back as it comes to the property line here. There was a comment from an adjacent neighbor that, that there's a unit here that's also very tight. We have a 3-story townhomes here, and I think being on the north side of the complex, that this is something that we might consider as we go forward on the design. But as you can see, there's essentially a screen of redwood trees all the way around this edge, so that kind of creates a buffer between our site and the adjacent property. This is a section of the kind of cutting through, so that this is the pool deck area, the recreational area. There's a very tall wall, and as well as kind of the side wall of the building right here. So what we've done is kind of created a 3-story element here, even setting back on the 3rd floor, so that we can even diminish the amount of solar impact to the adjacent property and to the pool. We actually ran different solar kind of simulations, and when we go through with the formal applications, we can share with you all those conditions. So as you can see, this is kind of the 3D view of that conditions. What we are suggesting is that as we develop, again, because the garage is not taking all the way to the property line, we are able to get real landscape along the edge. So our landscape architect's proposing a couple of different landscape options to create additional screening there. The other view is basically cutting through longitudinally through the courtyard. As you can see, there's a step down from a 5 to a 3-story edge along the rear property line, in addition to the substantial setback that we have back there. The other thing that I want to highlight is also, because this is a 5-story building, we're actually doing a Type 3 building. That means that no fire ladder pads would need to be along the perimeter. We've checked with the fire department. What it does is really allow us to activate the edge, so that you have a lot more landscaping, more softer, kind of a transition, as you can see here. We try to, this is obviously not the view, it's higher than the building. We want to make the point that the redwood trees here on the rear property line really creates kind of a buffer. We understand through the lower branches you will probably see, or some of the branches you see into the courtyard. But the idea is that this courtyard would be a really pristine, beautifully, our clients have an image of this being a sculptural courtyard, very nicely manicured and sculpture garden there. In terms of the architecture, I think it was interesting on the previous project, there was mention about this El Camino Real Boulevard kind of datum, right? And so we try to take I guess a more interpretive, instead of having a birthday cake kind of effect, we try to take a more creative approach where the porte-cochere and along with the lounge area becomes kind of the frontage to activate the front. But what it does, a portion of the building actually steps back with kind of this base, middle, and top to create a more contemporary look. But we didn't feel like that if this was continuous, it would be almost too boring and too monotonous. So one of the things that we thought about is what happened if we kind of shift the top and middle in this middle block to create little variations and play. In terms of material and finishes, we're looking at plaster. There's going to be some porcelain tiles on the base to create some really quality of the base. But we thought the Los Gatos Library, which is a building that we really like in terms of the quality of the material and finishes, that we were aspiring to kind of get to that point of the detailing. But the idea of the building is contemporary, but what we want to do is also bring some warmth in the material, especially on the upper floor. And we've heard some comments from the neighbors that their issue is not only about the shadowing of potentially the trees of the project, but the ambient light that goes into especially the lower floor. So one of our thought was actually to create a little bit more plaster, kind of a lighter plaster finish, and then have a more woodsy material up on top. So where the building kind of engaged the ground, especially the 3 and 5 story condition, those lighter color of the plaster would actually create some reflective light in the lower floor not only for the hotel, but also kind of create some ambient light at the lower level. As you can tell, one of the things that we try to do is also when we're addressing the side yard condition, we're trying to create kind of a more creative way of kind of have these kind of a scissor or serrated edges along the edge so that we can create more kind of a little bit more interesting articulation, and maybe even having the window viewing out to the views. In terms of the material palette, we'll continue to work on that, but the idea is to have this very rich kind of a combination of the lighter plaster and darker, kind of aluminum or wood kind of a finish. This is a quick kind of a snapshot of the pool deck. As you can tell, we've also been hearing from the neighbors that privacy is definitely an issue, although the privacy is somewhat partial because this is the clubhouse. It has a blank wall. The units are actually looking out onto the pool deck, but nevertheless, we are respectful of that privacy. So if you look at the floor plans are mostly kind of more private, kind of more incidental area. We're not opening up living rooms and bedroom windows onto the adjacent property, so it creates a little bit more of a neutral facade there. So this is I think it could work, hopefully it'll work. It's actually a video. I cannot get to this point here. Oh, so I'll try to do a quick tour. Is that the video is moving slower than I am. So, okay. Okay. Oop. So this is kind of a quick video walkthrough of a site. We want to respect the Grand Boulevard vision, have articulation so the building doesn't feel like one giant block, but have kind of some finite parts, but have a very strong base element. The reason why we did kind of a single lane, and there's some discussion about why we don't do a 2 lanes, and again, it's kind of lessons that we learned from the Hilton Garden Inn project, is that it really kind of, I thought it really took away from the kind of the urban nature of that street. And what we really want to do is, honor the presence of the, kind of this Grand Boulevard notion. And the idea of that, by the way, is being able to, if you're on an Uber, you can drop off and you can just take off. But if you're checking in the hotel, the idea is that you don't drop off your luggage at the porte-cochere. There will be a valet / kind of a bellhop there to tell you pull downstairs and pull in and check in there. So this is just a quick overview of some of the massing things that we're talking about. The pitch roof that we're pitching now, the lower end of that pitch roof is actually due north, so that is less impact on the adjacent property, and kind of the more solid elements here on the upper floor to minimize the amount of privacy issues we have. One thing about the parking lifts I want to refer to. There was a question, and we're arranging a trip for staff and some of the folks, different departments, to go tour the parking lift. As a matter of fact, it's an automated parking lift, so you don't have to literally, as a resident or as a hotel guest, you don't have to drive into the tandem garage. It's like is what we call puzzler. It's basically like a vending machine. So the attendant will take your key. There will be plenty of spots there, or you can stack even on the ramp or down below on the parking garage. They'll take your key. They'll pull the car into the first tray. There's one tray, and then the tray itself is automatic to get that spot to the right places. You don't necessarily have to drive through the different kind of the tandem conditions. So with that, I'll just open for questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to do the public comment period now, and each person will have 5 minutes. And so the first speaker will be Charlene Carlson, followed by Ann Mason, and then Neil Murphy.
Good morning. My name is Charlene Carlson, and I have resided in Palo Alto Redwoods for 20 years. Today, I am speaking as president of Palo Alto Redwoods Homeowners Association to strongly emphasize that we, as a multifamily neighborhood community, vehemently object to the proposed development of the Suhong property. The Board of Directors provided written comments, which are included in your agenda packet. And I will highlight information about our community and our concerns. And I will say, I'm going to fess up, I'm the one hugging the tree. in your photos there. Many residents are attending today to oppose the development, and I ask them please to stand. Palo Alto Redwoods was built in 1983 and designed on a former redwood tree farm to take advantage of existing heritage redwoods. We are proud that we share the redwood tree symbol with the City of Palo Alto and Stanford University. We won multiple awards, and the association maintains our property in the original design to respect its unique architectural integrity. Most of our buildings are 3 stories high. We have 117 households and 117 large trees, predominantly redwoods, 1 per household, basically. And we have always lived in a peaceful, beautiful, private redwood forest that is a hidden oasis located, surprisingly, on a transportation corridor. We are a diverse community of multiple ethnic backgrounds and ages with a growing number of families. We have 265 residents, including 35 children, and a number of older residents who no longer drive. Our youngest resident is a newborn, and our oldest is about to turn 96. Most residents work in the Silicon Valley or are associated with Stanford. However, some work out of their homes or are retired. Seniors, parents, and children on foot stroll the complex or enter and exit the property to walk to nearby services. Adults and children ride bicycles in and out for transportation or exercise, and one resident maneuvers the neighborhood in a motorized wheelchair with a service dog. There is only one way for vehicles to enter and exit the redwoods, and that is through a driveway on El Camino Real. We are a self-contained community with adequate parking for residents and visitors, as well as service delivery and emergency vehicles. We do not intrude upon neighbors with vehicles or block traffic on El Camino Real. There is no such thing as an absolute right based on ordinance maximums. Every proposed project must be carefully scrutinized through a lens of reasonableness to assure that it meets the ARB goals of encouraging the attainment of the most desirable use of land and improvements, and enhancing the desirability of living conditions on the immediate site or in the adjacent areas. The proposed development does not pass the reasonableness test, as it dwarfs neighboring residences, blocks sunlight and air to neighboring buildings and trees, encroaches upon neighborings by not providing adequate self-contained parking, and poses unreasonable health, safety, and environmental risks to neighbors. The Redwoods Board in our submission wrote that there is not one single thing about this development that benefits our community, but there are many things that pose harm. The next speakers will focus on significant concerns regarding zoning, environmental impact, traffic and parking, and safety. What I say is when they go high, we say no. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next speaker is Ann Mason. And then Neil Murphy.
Good morning. I've owned a home in the Palo Alto Redwoods since 1999. My home is directly adjacent to the hotel property line in the South Tower. I'd like to discuss 3 topics today. And for brevity, I would like to refer to the 4250 El Camino Real as the Redwoods and 4256 El Camino Real as the hotel. The first topic is zoning. As Charlene mentioned, the Redwoods was built in 1983. We are a 100% residential neighborhood with an HOA and BMR units. There is no commercial activity whatsoever at the Redwoods. Adjoining the Redwoods on McKellar Lane are apartments, and across El Camino Real are townhouses and homes behind the Elks Lodge. If you were to zone the Redwoods today, what land use designation would you give it? Well, the McKellar apartments are residential multifamily, and the homes behind the Elks are residential. But the land the Redwoods was built on used to be a plant nursery. Somehow the city or county never updated the land use designation of the Redwoods to residential multifamily, which is appropriate and accurate. None of us would be here in chambers today if the Redwoods were zoned as residential, which it has in fact been since 1983. The residential multifamily land use zoning designation would prevent the owner and developer from proposing such aggressively dense and tall and offensively harmful structures in the midst of surrounding Palo Alto residents. The Redwoods should by right be zoned residential multiple family with all the attendant protections. Secondly, I'd like to talk about below market rate residents. The entirety of the 12 BMR units abut the hotel property line. The BMR units will disproportionately suffer from the impacts of the development: noise, darkness, fire hazard, construction risks, tree damage, etc. This is discriminatory on the part of the hotel owner and developer. Third, I want to talk about hotels. Hotels contribute no services to Palo Alto residents, only to visitors. They do not make a neighborhood more pedestrian-friendly or give it a higher walk score. Palo Alto residents desire services and attractions within walking distance to have a higher quality of life. Hotels make neighborhoods resident hostile. Hotels increase the already critical Bay Area housing shortage crisis by utilizing valuable land. Is the city keeping track of the maximum new commercial development limit of 3,257,900 square feet of new non-residential development in planning areas evaluated in the 1989 citywide land use and transportation study? A hotel is open to serving customers from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. This will cause night noise at the Redwoods. The U-shaped design of the hotel concentrates all the noise like a horn and sends it into the Redwoods property, wedding noises in particular. The fourth floor roof garden will broadcast hotel guests' parties and private conversations directly into the Redwood residents' windows. The South El Camino Real design guidelines designate the section of El Camino Real south of Meadow as the hotel zone. We already have 7 hotels in this region: Crown Plaza, Dinah's, the Hilton Garden Inn, Palo Alto Inn, America's Best Value Inn, Homewood Suites by Hilton, the Oaks Motel. This list sounds more like a description of Highway 101 than a stretch of the historic Royal Road. This hotel places an undue burden of responsibility for hospitality on our neighborhood in Palo Alto. It is unfair to us who make our homes here, and it treats us as inferior compared to the rest of Palo Alto. In summarize, on finding number 2 of the ARB goals, the project has a unified and coherent design that A, creates an internal sense of order and desirable environment for occupants, visitors, and the general community. The hotel is intrusive to and does not respect our privacy, increases noise and traffic congestion, and supplants desired amenities and services in favor of visitors, not residents of Palo Alto. B, preserves, respects, and integrates existing natural features that contribute positively to the site and the historic character, including historic resources of the area when relevant. The hotel obscures the natural features of the environment from both residents and passersby and makes historic El Camino Real feel like a highway. D, provides harmonious transitions in scale, mass, and character to adjacent land uses and land use designations. The hotel is aggressively dense and offensively taller than any other building on El Camino Real, except Crown Plaza, which was built in the 1950s before land use management and has ample setbacks, ample parking, and beautiful landscaping. E, enhances living conditions on the site if it includes residential uses and in adjacent residential areas. The hotel damages living conditions in all Palo Alto Redwoods residents, most especially the BMR residents and all those living on the property line. The hotel destroys the livability of South El Camino Real neighborhood, which is already a large bearing a disproportionately large hospitality burden. It is as if it were designed with the intent to drive our quality of life and property values to zero. The hotel meets none of the criterion for harmonious coexistence with the adjacent residents of Palo Alto in general. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Neil. Next speaker will be Neil Murphy, and then Gail Curtis.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to make a public comment. As I'd like to reiterate, as Ann mentioned, we are a residential community and have been since 1983 for 34 years, despite CS zoning. My name is Neil Murphy. I'm a homeowner of 6 years in the Palo Alto Redwoods community. I'm here to address our concerns about the environmental impacts of this project. These include significant losses of light to our homes, significant negative impact to our many heritage redwood trees, and negative health impacts from air and noise pollution. First, loss of sunlight. Access to sunlight has a profound impact on our well-being as humans. It is so important, in fact, that simulating this exposure to sunlight is an effective treatment for depression. Depriving a person of access to light can directly cause actual psychological harm. Despite the fact that our complex is covered with beautiful redwoods, a significant amount of sunlight passes through them into our homes every day, both as direct sunlight and indirect ambient light. Both are valuable, and both will be significantly reduced by this project. If this project is approved, many units, including my own, will lose massive amounts of daily sun exposure. For the 27 homes in our community facing the proposed project site, that is the only sunlight we get every day. We've calculated the amount of light we will lose based on the season and angle of the sun and found that this project will take away 30% of our daily light in the winter and up to 82% in the summer, when days are longer and we should be getting more sunlight. Additionally, our sunny pool and spa will be cast into shade, dwarfed by the immediately adjacent townhomes. Removing our light represents an unacceptable decrease to our quality of life, our property values, our abilities to resell, and the current enjoyment of our own homes. Next, harm to our heritage redwood trees. We have approximately 30 mature, decades-old redwood trees that are threatened by this project. A 5-story hotel depriving our heritage redwood trees of light to their lower branches will cause those branches to die off, removing our existing privacy barrier. Instead of looking out over beautiful redwood branches where finches perch and squirrels play, we will look through naked trunks to see the side of a building. Further, the root systems of these trees have been developing slowly over decades. They cannot be replaced. If they are damaged by construction dewatering, our heritage redwoods will die from water deprivation. This is also unacceptable. Additionally, the dense 5-story hotel is a heat mass and will likely reflect heat onto the trees, altering their climate. And redwood trees do not thrive in climates with additional heat. Also, it's not clear that the proposed building is sufficiently outside of the drip zone for the corner lot trees at the back of the Suhong parking lot. Next, mental and physical health. This sunlight or its absence determines if a home will be a warm, comforting refuge or a dark hole. Sunlight deprivation causes depression, and many of us will end up forced to live in dark, depressing caves that were not the sunny homes that we initially purchased. Further, our body's circadian rhythms are directly connected to how much sunlight we get, and this can cause sleep disruptions. This significant loss of light to our homes will directly cause a negative psychological and physical impact to our well-being. A lack of sunlight also contributes to dry rot and mildew and can lead to respiratory health problems for our residents, as well as the deterioration of our structures. It is critical that an independent and objective light and shade study be undertaken to assess the negative impact to our community. Next, air pollution from tobacco smoke. The Palo Alto Redwoods is a non-smoking facility. The proposed hotel currently has no place to put a designated smoking area on El Camino that will be further than 25 feet away from the building. This means that employees, guests, and residents will go out to the back of the property to smoke, where our residents will have to deal with the toxic fumes wafting through our windows. Next, sound pollution. The structure of a 50-foot tall hotel would reflect and amplify the already incessant noise from the Crown Plaza Hotel's HVAC unit. Guest cars and hotel service crews working 24/7 will add noise, as we already experience from the parking lot of the Crown Plaza Hotel, and any noise in the proposed courtyard will be focused and reflected at our homes. We are also concerned about sound pollution from construction, which we are told is permitted to begin at 8 a.m. on Saturdays due to the CS zoning, and continuing for at least 18 months. Many of us work all week long to be able to rest and sleep in on the weekend, and being forced to wake up at 8 a.m. to the sound of construction will interfere with our right to the quiet enjoyment of our homes. May I continue?
You can wrap up your last sentence, please.
Final paragraph?
Okay. No, maybe a last sentence.
Oh, well, that's why we did the double sign up and seating the time, and you said that it'd be okay.
Two speakers, right, who were willing to cede time, but I will defer to staff on this one.
I need one, max.
I think it's fine. I think it's fine if you need 1 minute.
Sure discussion. If you do that, I would offer that, you would make the same
I think it's fine.
concessions for others as well.
Yes, equal accommodation. Okay.
Thank you. In summary, this project represents a significant and unreasonable negative impact to our quality of life, including a massive loss of direct and indirect light causing harm to our trees and our own well-being, an ongoing air pollution nuisance from tobacco smoke, and an ongoing noise pollution nuisance from hotel events and construction. Such a damaging project fails to meet the ARB's findings number 2B to preserve, respect, and integrate existing natural features, like our trees, and number 2E, to enhance living conditions in adjacent residential areas. As such, it should not be permitted to proceed. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Gail Curtis, and then Tillman Schulte.
Good morning. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you all, and I will try to keep to my limit here. My name is Gail Curtis. I have been a homeowner and resident at Palo Alto Redwoods since 1992. I'm here today on behalf of the Palo Alto Redwoods community to express our concern over parking, traffic, and safety issues around the proposed project. Every day at the Redwoods, we have many delivery vehicles coming into our driveway, such as FedEx, UPS, Postal Service, and we have space to accommodate them while they work. There are also many service vehicles such as Xfinity, gardeners, plumbers that come in, and they come in frequently. In addition, there are trash trucks and moving vans that need lots of space and often more time in the driveway. The site plan for the Palo Alto Redwoods takes these needs into account and gives space for them to park, turn around, and exit quickly. With the proposed project, we don't see much support for this kind of activity. They say trucks can park in their driveway or on El Camino, but what happens when they all come at once? And they do. All those drivers are trying to meet their deadlines, and at 10 a.m. you see the place is full. The problem for us is that a line of trucks stacked along the El Camino curb quickly creates a problem at our driveway entrance and exit. Even if the truck or van doesn't block the driveway outright, it may obscure the sight lines into oncoming traffic. This creates a hazard for everyone who needs to exit our property and get onto El Camino. There's a related problem when passenger cars such as Uber, Lyft, or taxis come to pick up their customers. They tend to park along the curb and wait, often seeming indifferent to the needs of other drivers to move in and out of driveways. We would like to see how the hotel will provide enough space for these pick-up and drop-off vehicles, even when other cars or trucks are in the way. Finally, we find an apparent lack of guest or visitor parking in the proposed project. It is reasonable to assume that the townhouse residents will have visitors from time to time, and there's no reason to think that the hotel occupants won't have the same. Where will these visitors park? Palo Alto Redwoods has 22 guest parking spaces, and 3 of them are right at the front entrance on El Camino. These are regularly used by our service vehicles and our own guests, especially those participating at an event in our clubhouse. We see that it'd be very easy for someone to come visit the proposed hotel or resident and to pull into one of our 3 parking places and walk away. We don't want that to happen. We need those spaces. The site plan for Palo Alto Redwoods has provided for the parking needs of our community and dedicated space for them. We believe it's only fair that the proposed project should do the same on its own property. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Tillman Schulte, and then Julie Baskin.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity here to speak. So my name is Tillman Schulte, and I'm living at the Redwood Apartments at El Camino here for the last 10 years with my family. So I want to highlight a personal note. So my son is going here to the Palo Alto School District and is now a freshman at Gunn High School. And he first time now bikes to Gunn High School. And my biggest concern regarding this proposed project is the increased safety risk for our children to commute on bike to school. In our community, there are over 13 children, as we heard, going to different kinds of school in Palo Alto. We have there, for example, Johanna Brioni's elementary school, Baumann International, Terman Middle, and Gunn High School. And however, there's no safe passage for our kids to go to school independently, and our community must put in consideration if building a giant hotel complex with townhouses on a relatively small property will contribute to increased traffic, parking, and ultimately safety risks. We already have experience, and my son confirmed this, the increased traffic and biking hazards from the new Hilton Garden Hotel to our left, where the incoming and outgoing traffic is blocked from view until approaching the building, forcing us to go the other way for a safer commute. Now creating another giant building to this other side of our family living community cuts the last option for using a bike to commute to Palo Alto schools. Starting with constructions, there will be trucks blocking that routes for several months or even years. The sidewalk may be completely blocked, as it has happened during the Hilton construction. And even after completion, the enhanced traffic will create risk from entering, exiting, and stopping vehicles from El Camino Real that will make it difficult to use the sidewalk for pedestrians and bikes, or even pass this traffic on street. I can't see any benefit of the residents of the Palo Alto Redwood community and all those going to Palo Alto schools. In my opinion, this project adds immensely to traffic hazards and will directly impact the safety of our kids in our community who are using the sidewalks and traffic lights to go to their schools in our area. As a community, it should be one of our highest priorities to ensure safe routes, passages to schools, foster growth and independence for our kids, and the choice of an environmentally friendly daily commute. And I was astonished if I see this picture here. You see this bike rider. I don't know. Think about all the delivery trucks, parking, people who are blocking this. If you have a child, consider this, how safe it might be going there on this sidewalk, how they will maneuver to their target, to their school. So I'm really concerned about that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with you.
Great, thank you. Julie Baskind, and then we have two speakers who were willing to cede their time. Two other speakers, which was Joan Fox and Lois Ho.
Okay, all right, I'm the cleanup hitter, so I'm wrapping up. My name is Julie Baskin, and I've lived at the Palo Alto Redwoods since 1988. To recap, on behalf of our community, we cannot stress enough our rejection of this proposed aggressive development as submitted today. We've been mindful of some of the stated goals and purposes of ARB to enhance the desirability of living conditions upon the immediate site or in adjacent areas, as well as the desirability of residences or investment in the city. Among the many objections to this project, we've identified the three most important, previously highlighted by my friends and neighbors. They are, 1, the Redwoods are improperly zoned commercial, and if it were properly zoned residential multifamily, we would not be discussing this today. The proposal is too massive and of inappropriate size, leading to extreme loss of light to our residents and damage to our wood-shingled buildings, pool and spa area, and most dear to us, our heritage redwood trees. And finally, number 3, our overall environmental impact concerns, health, safety, parking, traffic, congestion for our 265-plus residents. We invite you to come visit our community anytime to experience our uniqueness and see why we are so passionate that this project not proceed. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. And we have two more speakers. We have John Huter and Jake Logan.
Good morning. I'm John Hutar. I have the privilege of serving as general manager for Dinah's Garden Hotel at 4261 El Camino. And I say honor, I'm carrying on the legacy that Raymond Handley started. His vision was realized by employing Robert Royston as the landscape architect. The April 1958 cover of Architectural Record featured Dinah's Garden Hotel as a forward, modern vision of hotel design. And as early as last week, we had a guest, an architect by trade, visiting Stanford, admiring that magazine and taking it all in on what our humble little block there has to offer as far as architecture. The proposed project at 4256 El Camino has several significant flaws. Among the many issues, density for the site is too high, the parking solution is significantly flawed, and increased traffic will make the nearby section of El Camino and neighboring streets unsafe. I did provide staff a letter that I'm taking excerpts from, and it has our beautiful koi fish for easy reference. As it relates to project density, it's not clear how this will be evaluated given that there's a residential and commercial component. But on the low end of the calculation, the site would need to be 46,558 square feet or 1.07 acres. A more conservative calculation would be 51,750 square feet or 1.18 acres. And Table 3 in the report indicates that the site is 0.595 acres or 25,960 square feet. So no matter how you add that up or what view you take, it seems to be woefully short, and there's more information in my letter. The flawed parking solution, from my experience running casinos with huge parking operations, mechanical lift and parking just aren't a good idea. That's more for the developer, but the parking puzzle is unclear, and how vehicles will traverse there is unclear, and it just seems like it's going to be a nightmare. And the fact that they haven't seemingly incorporated peak flow is problematic. Guests tend to arrive around the same time, and guests depart a hotel around the same time, and you're not designing for flow throughout the day. You have to address the peak flow. In addition, it's not clear, though I learned today that there is some food and beverage component to this. The information I had in this writing, it wasn't clear what the food and beverage offerings would be. But that opens the door to trash pickup, recycling pickup, tallow extraction, and that flow of those trucks adds more complexity to the situation. Thirdly, the traffic pattern, if you're approaching the subject property from the north on El Camino, it requires a U-turn to enter. If you're exiting and wanting to go north, you will have to proceed south and make a U-turn. And going in a U-turn in both directions will cause congestion on both sides, but particularly the U-turn at Dinah's Court, which is already tight given the traffic from the Campagna Hotel. In conclusion, I respectfully ask that you join me in opposing the project as proposed, and I ask that you seat alternative project that is less dense, a development that would enhance and not detract from the present-day character of our community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And our last speaker for this item is Jake Logan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for giving me a moment here to express my concerns.
I wanted to say I have lived at the Palo Alto Redwoods for 10 years, starting in 2005, and I now rent the unit to a young professional working here in Silicon Valley. I share the concerns that have been raised by all my friends and neighbors here, each and every one of them. And the 4 or 5 that are most important to me, I think, are property values. I'm concerned that the property value will be impacted by this new development. Privacy. I think my unit is probably one of the very closest to the property line, and I've seen from some of the diagrams that it's about 10 feet away. I think people who are renting from me and also people in the hotel won't have very much privacy. Light is also a concern, although my unit is on the 4th floor. It's probably less of a concern for my unit than a lot of the other folks, but it is a concern. And I think probably the biggest one is just the overall impact to quality of life. I think that's a serious concern for every resident, not only the ones right next to the property. And the last point is one that I think others have made too. I honestly can't see any single significant benefit to the Palo Alto Redwoods from this development. I just can't see a single one. And so that's all I had today. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Appreciate it very much.
Great, thank you. And we do have one last speaker, Mr. Moss.
Thank you, Chairman Liu and Commissioners. Let me begin by saying I urge you to reject this project. It's totally incompatible with the El Camino design guidelines and any rational use of that site. Let me give you some background. About 40 years ago, 3 of us in Barron Park created the El Camino design guidelines. At that time, almost half of the commercial properties between Page Mill and Adobe Creek are automotive related. I'll give you a couple of examples where Happy Donuts is today. It was a repair shop until it burned down. The building, which until recently was the exercise place, 2 doors down from Matadero, was an auto parts store. Just 2 examples. So what we did was we created an intent to minimize automotive-related uses along El Camino and emphasize commercial uses which benefit the neighbors, where people can go to shop. A restaurant fits that description. A hotel does not. Hotels don't serve the neighborhood. Furthermore, because most of the people who would be staying at that hotel will want to go to Stanford or Stanford Research Park, they're going to create a huge traffic problem. Leave the hotel, turn down El Camino, zigzag across the street, make a U-turn by Dinah's or the next street down, back up El Camino to Charleston and Rastadero, and turn down there, which is totally jammed at 9 o'clock in the morning because of people going to the research park and the schools. Or if you go down El Camino, that's jammed until 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning. So it's going to create a massive problem for traffic. It's going to have a negative impact on the neighbors living near us. And it is not going to comply with the intent of the El Camino design guidelines because it's not going to serve the community. The carbon dioxide which will be generated by the cars stalled in traffic from that hotel is also going to be a problem. You're not required to approve a project just because it meets the basic outlines of the zone. You can reject it because it's incompatible with the community, with the intent of the design on the El Camino, and because it's too massive. And this project meets all 3 of those criteria. It should be rejected and killed forever.
Great, thank you, Mr. Moss. And we're not making any decisions today because it's just a study session. Questions from the board? Wynn?
Could staff give us a little more background on the zoning of the Palo Alto Redwoods site? And among other things, what's the actual residential density, development density on that site? RM what?
Sure. It seems that in the past, the CS zoning, which is actually what the Palo Alto Redwoods is zoned, allowed for residential multifamily as an allowed land use. Yes. So it wasn't required to be a part of a mixed-use development at all, or adjoining a hotel. At some point from 1983, when it was built, to now, the zoning changed and only permits housing in mixed-use developments or hotel. So that is just something that happened in the past, and currently it wouldn't be replicated under the current land uses that are permitted in the CS zone. As far as the residential density, I am not sure of that. It seems that it's more likely leaning towards the RM40, just because of the number of units, but I haven't fully investigated that.
Thank you. So they became a legal non-conforming use some time ago when the zoning was changed? And
correct.
At some point, it would be interesting to know if we have a zone in which they would be a lawful use, or if we no longer have a zoning category which would permit this kind of development. Not today, obviously.
We could investigate further.
That's my only question right now.
And then when I think just to follow up on that, is my recollection is after the Arbor Real project was built, that the council decided to go forward and try to make a change to not allow all residential projects because it's a missed opportunity to have commercial at the corner. Peter.
Just to follow up further on that, several of the speakers today from the community mentioned that if the property were zoned RM 35 or something, this project would not be allowed. Can you enlighten us what that would be or what that means?
It doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't be allowed. It would need to change because then certain zoning requirements would be triggered. For example, the height might need to change. There could be implications with the daylight plane potentially.
Can you be more specific? What would need to change? What would they be if this were zoned residential?
So if this was zoned residential, it would depend on that zoning density. So if it was RM40, it would be less restrictive. If it was zoned RM15, which is not likely due to the number of units there, it would have a daylight plane requirement, and then that would be more restrictive on the height as it's approaching the property lines. But currently, the way the code is written for a CS zone, for example, the daylight plane isn't required because it specifically calls out zoning districts as opposed to land uses. So it's residential zones versus land use.
And then, for example, like we had the Marriott Hotel in San Antonio. So like the greenhouse condominium project was a PC zone. So then there was no requirement for the hotel to step the height down from 50 to 35 feet. If it were RM30, it would have to go down. RM40, the height limit would still be 50 feet.
Yeah, I just wanted to have it out there what the conditions would be. One other zoning question for staff. My understanding is that they're allowed to go to an FAR of 2.0 because this is a hotel. What I'm seeing here is they're using a 0.25 FAR for residential. If it were not a hotel, they would only be allowed to go to, is it a total of 1.0 FAR?
Correct. That would be under the mixed use.
So
go ahead.
At what point do you let the residential FAR kick in? At the beginning or the end of the counting? I think the council's intention in allowing a 2.0 FAR hotel was to get a hotel that's that big. And when they're putting in residential as part of that and still allowing for a more massive building, I'm wondering if there's any way, how staff interprets that, or if there's a question mark about that. Is that clear?
Yeah, the code section is 1816.060 subsection D, and that would be the hotel regulations in the CS zone. And it specifically states that hotels with condos being proposed should not have more than 25% of the FAR dedicated to the residential use. So that's the category 3 in that subsection D that has a limitation.
Great, thank you.
Q. I just have a quick question on the existing public utilities easement that's on the site. Do you have any information on what utilities are going through there? Any history behind the PUE to begin with?
During the DRC meeting, utilities did comment on that, and they did say that part of it seems to be an older easement, so some of it would be vacated. However, another portion of it is still utilized, and they did request when the project comes in formally that a utility survey would be conducted to figure out exactly what's there. But it seems like a number of what used to be there may not currently be utilized by our utilities department.
Any other questions? When will you start us off?
Certainly. Thank you to the applicant and the public for that intelligent, thoughtful, informative set of presentations. I think a case like this is probably why the ARB exists, because we have a lot of directions from the council. One of them is that this is a suitable place for a hotel, and another is that extensive series of performance standards and approval standards that we have to apply. And I'm very grateful that the applicant brought this forward as a study session, because this is a complicated proposal and it's a complicated neighborhood. And I'm also grateful because I never would have known that Palo Alto Redwoods existed, even though it appears I have friends there, before I went to do a site view here. And that is a spectacular development in all the good senses of the word. Not that it draws attention to itself, but that once you look, it's quite beautiful. And it's interesting that it's so close to Dinah's Garden Hotel, which is also a striking example of the architecture of its era and Palo Alto's effort to be, combine both urban pleasures and suburban ease. I don't quite know where to begin. In looking at this project, the first thing I'm going to be looking at is how it affects its residential neighbors, because that's one of the things we're called on to look at, whatever the zoning is. So I'll be looking for much more detailed information about light and shadow and noise. The vision of everybody in the lower 2 floors having seasonal affective disorder is not attractive. And in all seriousness, I think we need some very good light and shade studies to understand what would happen here. I'm also looking forward to some really good and detailed studies about the continued health of redwood trees and other trees. This site is fortunate in that it does benefit from the landscaping adjacent to it, but of course it also has its own obligations to provide landscaping. In that regard, I'm grateful that the proposal does not try, as some have had recently, to excavate to its boundaries, but understands that you need to not do that in order to accommodate essential landscaping. I have a number of concerns about circulation. First of all, I understand that I think I understand that our new regulations about using puzzle parking and other lifts does not require, as a matter of law, that their use for non-hotel uses be coupled with valet service. In other words, you could, in theory, and we've seen other proposals, use mechanical lifts for parking without valet service if it was a purely residential use, for example. I cannot imagine how this combined use would function without valet service for everybody all the time. It just, well, I literally cannot imagine it. Somebody could make the case, but I don't see it yet. I'm very concerned about the accommodation of all the trips to this site that would occur that aren't somebody driving up in a car to go to a hotel or me returning to my unit. So I'm thinking about people coming to provide caregiving or housekeeping services in the condominiums. I'm thinking about people with their repair vans coming, or contractors' white pickups coming to do work at my house, and they have to go back and forth to their trucks to get equipment and materials. I don't understand how trash services and delivery services would work for either the hotel use or the individual units. I think there's a serious concern about how you do a construction management circulation program as well, but that's, I think, less in our purview. I'm looking forward to learning more about what the safe routes to school are from this site, which has a significant number of children, and how this would affect this. One of the things that concerns me is that the Port Cochere two-driveway design, or two curb cut design, means that a very large portion of the frontage is not sidewalk. And I don't understand how, there's gaps, and I don't understand whether I'm supposed to walk in and out, if we're going to have bells and whistles going off all the time, which have their own impacts on the neighborhood to alert us to the presence of cars. The design as it stands doesn't look to me like it's going to work. I mean, we have struggled with this in all the hotel proposals I've seen. We've struggled with it in San Antonio, which is a much bigger site with much deeper spaces to do Port Cocheres that are perpendicular to the street rather than parallel to it. We don't know if that's going to work yet, though we've been assured it will, but this one, it seems to me, creates serious problems for pedestrians. Also, if this is an area where the place that bicycles are supposed to go is on the sidewalk, which as I understand is generally permitted in front of residential properties, I don't know if it would be permitted here. I want to know how bicycle circulation is going to work along here also. At the moment, it doesn't seem to me to work. With respect to the mixed use, I think it could work to have residential units that are separately owned as part of this hotel. I actually like the entrance being through the lobby, though how me carrying my groceries and my laundry or my child through the lobby is going to be compatible with other uses, I don't yet see. Or taking out my trash, for that matter. I'm concerned about, I like the fact that there is an internal courtyard that's buffered from El Camino, that is oriented away from El Camino, and so might in fact be a pleasant place to sit and talk and eat or whatever. But I'm concerned about two things. One is, how is it going to be buffered from the residential uses to the back? At the moment, it does look like it's just a noise channel that goes out that way. I live in residential development that backs up on non-residential development, but it's office. And there's a big garden between us. And in fact, they're a very effective noise buffer for us. And they make it more quiet because they buffer us from the noise of, in my case, Lytton, which, while not as intensive, not as noisy as El Camino, is significantly noisy. So for us, this higher building adjacent to the noisy street has an upside. It makes it quieter, and with the beautiful garden behind it, it makes it generally nicer. But it's much lower density than this, and it's not designed to be a social space late into the evening focused towards my residential uses. So I'm concerned not just about decibel levels, but what are people actually going to hear when that space is used as it's intended to be used for the hotel use. I'm also concerned about how much light would reach that internal courtyard. If it's going to work well, it needs to be effectively landscaped, and it needs to be light, both for the residents whose units will front on it, and for its own attractiveness. So I'm concerned and would like to know a lot more about light and shadow on that space under this proposal. I'm even more concerned about light and shadow and privacy impacts on Palo Alto redwoods, but I also care about it internally. see what my notes are from before. Oh, is this a housing inventory site?
Yes, it's
For how many
identified
units?
in the housing element, and I believe the density would be 20. 1 second, let me verify. Oh, realistic is 12, I'm sorry.
How many?
12.
12 units. And then also, there's cross-hatching on this site and in this area on the zoning map. What's that about? Some kind of overlay zone? We can get the answer to that later.
Yeah, I believe that has to do with the height limit.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. On the zoning map that you were given in your packet?
No, I was looking at my big zoning map.
Oh, the big zoning map.
We can talk about it later. I just
Okay.
was puzzled by the site zoning. The proposal seems to me to be under-landscaped. I do have one question about the use of what looks like giant bamboo, which is, I remember when all the giant bamboo in Southern California died in the same year because it was all cloned from the same plant. Perhaps these difficulties have been resolved, but I would want to know that that wouldn't happen here. And I think redwood and bamboo in theory might work, but the site generally looks under-landscaped to me. It doesn't seem to engage the public very effectively on El Camino. If in fact it does include an element over 50 feet, I cannot, based on what I've seen so far, support that. Again, at present, I can't see how I could make the required findings on this proposed parking. I'm really troubled by this anomaly that we have a lawfully built and permitted residential development that's big, involves a lot of people. And while our code does not protect denser housing in the way it protects perhaps more vulnerable single-family housing, we need to, I want to know that a building we approve on this site does not diminish the quality of life on the adjacent parcel. That seems to me one of the things we're required to do. Thank you.
Peter?
Yes. I find most of the arguments we've heard from the community to have quite a bit of merit. And I find this project has quite a few issues that need to be resolved before it can move forward, I think. Let me try to summarize things quickly. I think otherwise we'll just be going over it all day. But overall, it just seems like it's a little bit too massive. I say that because you have a number of issues that just aren't readily resolvable. You're really just too close. You're too heavily leaning into your neighbors. You're surrounded by this residential community that's strong and vibrant, and it's just a little bit too close to it. Your courtyard really doesn't work. It's just too narrow. It's not the beautiful space you're thinking it is. It's too narrow because you're too dense. You just don't have enough space to spread it out that way. And the last reason is that your parking just doesn't work. You don't have enough space to make parking for this size of a building. I say these things because the only reason you're allowed to make this level of a building this size is because of the city council's special exclusion just for hotels. And that does allow you to go to an FAR of 2.0, but you do have to meet all the other design and compatibility guidelines. I think you're going to find it very difficult to meet all those other requirements, to be compatible with the neighbors, to make the parking work, to make a building that has a quality sense about it, and to be at a 2.0 FAR. So it's not our place to tell you how big the building can be, how many square feet you can develop. But I really think you're going to find this to be very difficult. If you look at the past few hotels that have been before us, the same issue comes up over and over again. The council has directed us to allow a 2.0 FAR for hotels. I put that to the community as a whole. That's a political decision Palo Alto has taken. The 2.0 FAR is a building that's twice as big, twice as massive as anything that would normally be allowed, because our city council feels that's an important community benefit. We have to support that. Nonetheless, as an applicant, you have to find a way to make it fit, and the burden is very high. to drill in a little bit deeper, your parking just plain doesn't work. We had an application earlier today where we were praising them for having a mix of some at-grade parking for people stopping by quickly, dropping off something, some down below parking, but still easy for people to get in and out of without a machine. Sometimes you can have a valet operating a puzzler lift or something, but to have 100% or almost 95% puzzler parking is just not going to work. It's not sustainable. You'll be very sorry if you build it that way, but I don't think you'll even get much traction towards getting it approved. I think you'll have to be very honest with yourselves about finding a way to get a substantial amount of the parking easy for any person to use. You'll have to find a way to get some spots at grade, to have places at grade for people to jump in and out of their car, to get a cab, to have a UPS truck stop. You just, in this application, you haven't really addressed any of those issues. It's just too bad. You just really haven't thought through what is it like for somebody who's living here or going here. And it just has to be made to work. So we've had several applications in the past year or two where we've said the same thing. A building at the corner of Page Mill and El Camino had the same idea, and we've given them back the same response. We're being consistent here. Just because you're allowed to use these new puzzler lifts doesn't mean you can use it extensively and completely. They have to work with the basic functional requirements of this building. I have a reservation about your mix of residential and hotel uses. It's not to say that it can't work and doesn't work some places, but if it's going to be done, it has to be designed very carefully. The idea of sharing this public courtyard with both the residences and the guests is not realistic. Suppose you have a guest reception that's right outside a residence's front door. That's not good design. You really have to think about these things. We're tasked to make sure the building is functional, and that's the leg I stand on here. But I think you really need to think hard. If you want to have residential mixing with a hotel, it's a very special kind of residential development, and you really need to design it very carefully to get the mix of entrances, logistics, how people live there, because it's a very different use, really. I think that you need to really focus on that distinction. Another issue I have with your building, and it really relates to the massiveness, you just don't have space, is that you don't really have enough pedestrian activity on the sidewalk. Again, I refer you to the project we looked at earlier this morning. We were praising them for having places to sit, some plants out in the front, doing things to make it pleasant for people to be walking and living around here from the sidewalk. And I'm afraid what I see here really is a wall of limestone punctuated by a few openings, windows and a porte cochere, but it's making no effort whatsoever to embrace the pedestrian and pedestrian-friendly aspects that we're tasked to find and we want as a community so badly. We want a place for a small table, a bench to sit next to while you're waiting for your friend. You just have to think through your design, look back at other architects working on El Camino, and please try to find some way to get that pedestrian quality on the street. When I look at the form of the building, I find 4 different chunks, different masses, a red one, a white one, a brown one, a tan one. It's not really artfully composed, I'm sorry to say. It needs a little bit more of a quality of design to it that's just not there yet. I know we're not even close to designing the building itself yet, but I do say to you that what you have here isn't quite right yet. You do need to address bicycle parking. We've mentioned several times today that we want to see that at grade, easily accessible. There's more and more bike riding taking place in Palo Alto. You need to think of it at the beginning as an architectural issue. How do I address this? It's not something you throw in at the last minute when you're going through your checklist and just put an X down in the basement someplace. We're really asking you to anticipate. 5 people are coming by bicycle. Where are they going to stop? Where will they put their bicycle? How does it work? Are they blocking traffic? Are they comfortable leaving it there? Is it unsightly? You have to design that sort of stuff. On your landscaping, I find that the existing redwood trees are magnificent, and I think you need to embrace that as an existing condition. So I'm really baffled that you're proposing to put clumping bamboo right underneath them. I mean, what are you thinking? It's just, is there any connection? Do you know what a redwood tree looks like and how it lives? You can't do that. So I'm not asking for answers. I'm just pointing out to you that you really need to get a good landscape architect to come up with some very solid ways. Probably you need to just put more redwoods in on your side as well to enhance and continue that effect. but certainly you have to do something. And then I think you do need to do some shadow studies and see what your impact is going to be on the community. I'm not so sure that in the back you have done careful stepping of your building, and I think you will have less of an impact than everybody is saying, but we have the technology to make a clear study of that, and you owe it to the community and yourselves to do that study to make sure you don't have an undue impact on the neighbors. Lastly, let me speak to both the applicant and the community here. You'll save yourselves and us a lot of trouble if you can find a way to work together a little bit. As the applicant, this is a challenging project, and if you really want this big a building, it's going to be difficult. As a community, he has the right to develop this property. You cannot insist on it being an empty parking lot all the time. The fact that it's an empty parking lot to the back of a Chinese restaurant now is not the best thing either. There's a possibility they'll make it better, not worse, as an amenity to you and everybody else. I urge you to try to work together. Listen to his concerns, allow him some latitude. He's going to build something there. As an applicant, try to make it so it's better for them, not worse. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have too much to add to that. I remember going to the Denny's, actually. So we went to the Denny's when my family was looking for a place to live in Palo Alto, and we stayed at what used to be the Palo Alto Hyatt right before the fire. And then I also worked as a bellboy at Ricky's, not too far across the street, before Arbor Real. So I'm familiar with the site and what's been there previously, and I think Peter did a great job at the end there of explaining to both the applicant and the community that there needs to be some kind of a working together. And I understand that it's I guess it's kind of a shock when you're used to one thing and you're all of a sudden seeing something that's this massive. But I wanted to speak maybe with regards to the massing, just make a couple comments that haven't been brought up quite yet. When I first take a look at this cover sheet and the perspective image that's there, it's actually not that bad to me at first take. But I think there are a lot of things that you're trying to do with that El Camino Street elevation that aren't necessarily fully played out in your floor plans. We don't see the exact ins and outs of where the floor plates are drawn in or back, and how deep are those recesses, and exactly how do those materials come together, and what are the additional reveal lines in the stone and the siding, so on and so forth. To me, it just seems at a first overall glance that you're really trying to pack on as much density and max out the lot as much as possible. When I take a look at the ground level floor plan, my immediate reaction was to eliminate that 8th unit on the end. And really, I don't see why you wouldn't want to take advantage of a wider courtyard that opens up onto those redwood trees. I think that would be quite spectacular. But that leads into the overall sense that I'm getting from the other board member comments, is that it's just it's trying to do too much with the site, and I think it's gone a little bit over. But I also agree with board member Balte's comments that I think there can be something developed here that can serve as an asset to the community in a better way than just the parking lot to the back of Su Hong's currently. I also wanted to express concerns regarding the mixed circulation and circulation overall with this project. If you're a resident here, you have to either drop off your car or drop it off at the valet or the lift, and then take the elevator up to the lobby and exit the lobby into the courtyard and then enter your unit. It seems like there's a lot of mixing that could go on there that maybe isn't quite so desirable. So maybe there needs to be another look at a separation of pedestrian and user circulation. And then I just noticed some other things looking through the plan set. I understand that there have been some changes with regards to moving the reflecting pool to the middle of the courtyard and where it was previously, but some of the floor plans show that 8th unit on the end with the entry facing the courtyard. Some of them have it facing where the reflecting pond used to be. Also with regards to the landscaping plan and what you're showing in the perspectives, sometimes there are trees shown in the courtyard while the landscape plan calls them out as bamboo. And there was another image, or maybe it was in the animation, of you had like a bridge crossing the pond, and I don't see how that works with the site plan that we're looking at. So I understand things are in flux and that it's a study session, but I do feel strongly that what you have currently is a bit too massive, at least in the way that the building form is currently. I don't think I have too much to add on that. Oh, another last comment maybe is the stair tower at the corner. I'm not a fan of stair towers that are just emergency egress towers that aren't ever used, and they just end up being kind of dark glass towers. If there's an opportunity to maybe use that as a real method of circulation other than something that comes down to the back of the kitchen on the first floor, or maybe it just has to be rethought, and maybe that's not the best place for an architectural element like that. But I would at least applaud you attempting to reach out to the community and bringing this forward as a study session, and I look forward to seeing how it can be rethought and changed and evolved as we go on. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to the board for all the comments, and thank you to all the members of the public who came out to speak today. And I know I do want to acknowledge that we did get some emails from people who could not attend the meeting today. So I think my main concern on this particular project is twofold. One is I think you've got some really beautiful precedent images showing in the drawing set, but those are for like different building types, right? I mean, I think you have to acknowledge that if you want to do a hotel, like a 5-story hotel, that's like a different type of, it's a different mass of building, right? And I would argue that once you go up to like 5 stories, that you actually have to do a whole set of architectural ideas, meaning like, I think we've seen some of them today, but like deep pilasters, deep cornices, materials, colors, railings, all of that. And when I look at the plans, everything was flat, right? I mean, there's one setback on El Camino, but it's there's not enough. If you look at the Hilton Garden Inn, it has like, I think the windows are recessed a foot, right? There's building modulation in the order of, I think, maybe 8 feet in the facade, 3-foot deep cornices and balconies, and you're not showing any of that on your El Camino facade. So I think there's a lot of work to do on the El Camino frontage. And also similarly in the courtyard, the height to width ratio is fairly narrow. I mean, it seems comparable to new buildings that I've seen, new mixed-use buildings that I've seen in San Francisco. Like in Hayes Valley, there are a lot of new buildings that were built on the old freeway site. And those spaces can be pretty nice, but I would say that they're more of I don't know what to call them. More like more like a passageways or courtyard. You know, they're kind of like courtyards, but they're not really large gathering spaces, or it's not a Japanese courtyard. And that's just because the height to width ratio, they just feel different. And I think that you have to design it with that in mind, and not try to pretend that it's 1 or 2 story building. I think I've been talking to staff. I think my understanding is that we want a really robust arborist report, and we don't have it yet. I think that's critical, I think, to the city, for the city staff as well as to the neighbors. And then I also wanted to point out to you some problems that I'm having with the lack of a residential entrance. So we've got several things in our comp plan and zoning and our design guidelines. So like in our comp plan, like on page L16, there's policy L14. In our CS zoning, we have our context-based criteria, which is on page 20. And then in our South El Camino Real design guidelines on page 35, we also have item 4.2.1. And it's all about having that the multifamily residential units have some sort of presence on the street. And the zoning doesn't really say what it is, if it's a front door or front porch or a gate or balconies. But I think the real clue is in the comp plan, there's a picture of some front porches. And the intent is that the people who live there are part of the community and that they have to have some sort of presence on the street to be part of Palo Alto. It's very explicit that they don't want any units, we don't want any units that are walled off or completely internally oriented, which is what I think the townhouses that you're showing are doing, right? There would be no sense of that they exist, right? Unless you get past like the hotel lobby. So in my mind, you would not be able to meet the findings for that. If there's some other type of residential unit, like a timeshare or whatnot, it seems to me like that the design that you're showing could work. Or if it's like a corporate, a lot of the companies here rent out apartments. It seems to me like that could work. But if the intention is to have it, a for sale unit open to the public, then I don't think it's going to work. Also, if you're showing 3-bedroom units, then I'm going to presume they're kids and they need to have somewhere to play. I've been reading some books. I might share it with you. And is that the statistic it cites a statistic that like 75% of parents think that the play areas are inadequate in new buildings, in new multifamily buildings. And I haven't really thought about it, but I suspect that number may be right. So I think that has to be a consideration as well. And I do want to encourage staff to require like a solar study. And I think I've heard two things mentioned. One is for residential units, but then also for trees. And I did talk to Dave Doctor this morning before the meeting, and he was asking for something for the trees, as I understand it. And we did try to do something like that on the Hilton Garden Inn. There's an existing oak tree that was being shaded by a big 40-foot high wall. So we do need some. I think the board would be interested in seeing that. And then I just do want to highlight to the neighbors that I think the way our zoning is written in the context-based criteria is that we're going to try to minimize any impacts on shading, but we have no standard in the zoning. It doesn't say no impact. It just says for the board to minimize it. So we're going to have to take it as it comes. And otherwise, I think I'm in agreement with the rest of the board on a lot of the other issues. So I won't repeat them. I think the board has made the right is making the right comments on this particular item. So, are there any follow-ups? Anybody, or if you want to have any closing comments?
Yes, sure. So I have some notes that so Commissioner Palo mentioned. So for the for the tandem parking, we also talked to Sam. We offer actually a visit in Oakland at City Lifts, where staff and transportation engineer can go and take a look of how they operate. And then absolutely, this is going to be a 24-hour valid parking. That was the plan. And then for the residents, we were not planning. We wanted the residents to park their own car, but if transportation engineer will require for valid parking for the residents, we absolutely would like to do that if that's what would be the requirement. Is transportation engineer mentioned to us, we are over parked at this time, so we'll have to work with planning and transportation engineering department to see what we can do. I also want to mention that Dave Doctor was on site twice. We actually have a full arborist report which we can provide immediately. This design complies currently to preserve the 4 major redwood trees on our property right now. I think that was a couple of questions that you had. I don't know if I clarified it. And as far as the bamboo, we actually have 3 options. We don't have to go bamboo. It was a suggestion. And then this will be actually all contained, so the roots will not run. It's not a running bamboo type of plant, but we are very open to work with the neighbors to do whatever landscape it will help with the privacy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I think that's it for today on this one. Again, we don't have a formal application, but we will look forward to seeing it come forward in the future. And then for the community members, just keep your email comments coming. You're welcome to come to all the other hearings. And I think that's all. That's a wrap for this one. And then for staff, on the agenda, we do have meeting minutes listed, but the board has not received any. So can we bump that item to the next meeting?
Yes, then we'll defer that to the next agenda.
Great. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.